Recording in progress.
Of the Indian Point Closure Task Force and the New York State Decommissioning Oversight Board. I'm Tom Condon. I'm the chair of the task force and the DOB. And I'd like to turn it over to our executive director, Tom Kaczmarek, to give a few notes on the meeting logistics and run through a roll call, please. Tom?
Thanks, Tom. Good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting. My name is Tom Kaczmarek and I serve as the executive director. So I'll run through the names here quickly. I just ask if you can be brief in acknowledging your attendance. Senator Pete Harcum. Senator, you may need to unmute yourself. Well, I do believe the senator is with us, but we'll work on sound. I believe we're still waiting Assemblywoman Levenberg. Are you with us virtually?
She has texted me that she's in traffic. She'll be here as soon as possible.
Thank you. Kelly Turturro, DEC.
Here.
Harcum here. Didn't hear you. Apologies.
Thank you, Senator. Alex Damiani, Department of Health. Thank you, Alex. Rachel Adler, Department of Labor.
Here.
Jennifer Waka, Division of Homeland Security Emergency Services.
Online.
Thank you. Elise Peterson, NYSERDA.
Here.
Ed Birdie, New York Power Authority. Or if Joe Leary is on the line as well.
Yes, I'm on.
Thank you, Joe. Dave Lockbaum.
I'm here.
Thank you, Dave. Richard Webster. Or Victoria Lung? Okay. Mayor Knickerbocker.
Here.
Councilmember Creighton. Susan Spear,
Here.
Westchester County. Catherine Borgia, Westchester County Board of Legislators.
Recording in progress.
Bill Smith, EWUI.
Here.
And Tom Carey. Okay. Before I turn it back over to Chair Congdon. Oh, thank you, Tom. Before I turn it back.
Assemblywoman Levenberg.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Levenberg. Before I turn it back over to Chair Congdon, I want to provide a few brief reminders to those who are participating in person and online to ensure a smooth meeting. To our in-person board members and guest presenters, please speak into the mic to ensure your comments are clearly heard and accurately recorded. To our panelists joining by Zoom, please use your mics, keep your mics muted unless you are speaking. And to our Zoom participants who will be delivering statements later, please reserve the chat feature for reporting technical issues to our audiovisual team. Only questions captured in the Q&A field are able to be saved and reviewed. And finally, all speakers tonight are asked to indicate your name before making statements. This will support tonight's court reporter with accurately recording tonight's meeting. Let me briefly show the agenda for tonight's meeting. As you'll see, we have quite a bit of business to cover. Chair Congdon will provide welcome and some task force updates, which will be followed by state oversight updates from a number of our state representatives. We will then gather updates from Dave Lockbaum on a presentation on ISFISI inspections, which will be followed by Holtec operational updates. Then we will move on to the public statement portion of our meeting to conclude the evening. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Chair Congdon to begin tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Tom. So as many of you know, the meetings of the Closure Task Force and the Decommissioning Oversight Board provide an important venue for sharing information about the activities happening at Indian Point and state agency oversight. You know, decommissioning a nuclear power plant is no small task, and the hazards that are on site are very real and must be mitigated to protect the public safety and environment. The technical and environmental issues on site are almost as complex as the regulatory construct overseeing the site. And so the body, the Decommissioning Oversight Board, plays an important role in helping bring more attention to these issues and to shed light on some topics that are otherwise pretty complex. Our membership includes agencies with a role in either regulatory oversight or local government assistance, all local governments with jurisdiction over the site, elected officials representing these localities, the Hen Hud School District, the labor community, an independent technical expert, and a representative from the environmental community. Through discussions with these representatives, guest speakers, and with the public, we are fostering a greater understanding about what's happening at the site and what more each government entity can do to address concerns. We've been meeting on a pace of about every other month, and our format has allowed for outside perspectives to be presented, as well as regular presentations from Holtec and agencies, oversight agencies on their activity. Most importantly, the meetings have included a lot of opportunity for public engagement, with some public forums where there are opportunities for Q&A with the public and subject matter experts, as well as public statement hearings. As Tom already walked through, we have a full agenda, but of course the biggest update since our last meeting is that Governor Kathy Hochul signed the legislation sponsored by Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Levenberg that prohibits discharging radioactive wastewater from decommissioning facilities in the Hudson River. If that bill wasn't signed, the agenda for this month's meeting would look a lot different, but tonight we will be able to focus on other important topics. As Tom already walked through, we're going to hear some updates regarding state oversight, including a number of important letters that the state has sent to NRC in recent weeks. We will discuss various citations finding Holtec in non-compliance with NRC rules. Even where NRC has concluded no safety concerns about these citations, we will discuss the state's view that NRC should adjust its enforcement approach to decommissioning sites to address patterns of non-compliance. We will also talk about a recent NRC Inspector General report finding concerns with dry cask inspections in the southeastern United States, and whether there is cause for concern in the Northeast, Indian Point in particular. David Lockbaum will provide important context for why dry cask inspections are important. We will also hear from Holtec regarding their latest updates, including their summary of recent NRC citations and activities at the site. And lastly, we will have time for a public statement here. Before I dive into the state agency oversight updates, I want to open the floor to any DOB member that wishes to make an statement.
Tom?
Yes, Senator?
Might I say a word, please?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm sorry I'm not with you in person as I normally am. I have a family engagement, but I wanted to be with you to just to share a reflection. You know, Tom led with the news that the governor had signed an important piece of legislation, and what I thought it was worth reflecting on the process on how we got here. You know, as somebody who was involved with the initial legislation and worked with the community to help create the task force and how far we've come and just how we move forward. You know, to some people, the governor signing the bill would, to others who did not agree that was the way to go, I fully respect where you're coming from. That's democracy, and we vow to continue to work with you collaboratively to move forward. As Tom said at the beginning, this is complex, this is not easy, these are challenging issues, and we all have to work together. And to that point, I just want to make a plug for civility. You know, I think what's great about where we came from with this legislation was that it was a germ born out of public comment in the task force. And through a big, rigorous debate and exchange of ideas and facts, this is how the process moved forward. But I think we risked, with our zeal and our passion, we need to stay civil. I noticed there were several instances in the last couple of meetings where I thought folks crossed the line in terms of their comments, especially toward professional staff. The thing is, folks, we're going to be doing this for another 10 years, and we've got to get along, because if we're not civil, we lose the ability to listen to each other. And that, I think, is the most critical thing. And if we think of where we've come from, that this was an idea that was this task force, the Oversight Board was an idea that was first came from the community, then through legislation, then we got together during COVID, and through many community efforts on expressing ways to improve the technical and the feedback on this board. The staff went through great measures to do that and to avail public comment. And now we're at the point where it worked. We had public discourse. The legislature listened. We passed incredible legislation. The governor signed it. I think this is a sign that this worked. And everybody here has value. Certainly the professional staff, the whole tech folks, the whole tech workers, the activists, our union brothers and sisters. And as I said, we've got 10 years together to get this right. And I just hope that we treat each other with respect and dignity and civility. Let's be passionate, let's be factual, but let's be kind to each other, because we're going to be spending a lot of time together. And I just want to close by thanking all of the professional staff from New York State and from the county for the tremendous work you do. And I know this is not your only gig. I work with many of you constantly on other issues, and I admire your professionalism and your passion and your desire to serve the people of New York. And those of us who are in elective office, when we sign up, we know we're going to get sharp elbows, we know we're going to get dinged. But those of you who are public servants on the employee side of the ledger, shouldn't have to take those barbs. And I just want you to know how much I appreciate everything you do each and every day for the people of New York. I think this oversight board is a great thing that we've all created collaboratively. There's nothing like it in the country. We're a model for the rest of the country. And I think, we can really have an important role moving forward throughout this process as long as we handle our business correctly. So thank you all very much, and have a great meeting.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone else on the DOB want to say a few words? Dr. Lauro?
Good evening. I only wanted to give an update as to the HUD part of the project, which was monitoring. We have contracts in place and we're ready to roll. We are trying to get benchmark data on our school district in terms of environmental impact, if there is any, at any point at our BB elementary school. And the delay that we had in getting started is actually aligned with some construction work that we were doing this summer. And that I only found out from this meeting today that the last of the punch list items will be done probably within another week. So we wanted all that cleared out before we did anything, so this aligns well. The monitoring system is also a part of that, and that's a piece that I know I'm working with some of the people here at the state level to amend the contract in order to have that happen. So we're ready to go. We've got our contracts. We're satisfied with everything, and we're working in tandem with the commission on that. So I thank you for the help and assistance.
Thank you, Dr. Lauro. And just as an action item, just as a follow-up, I think, Susan, we'd like to convene a meeting with the county as well as DEC to discuss the contracts they have in place and the plan they have for monitoring and make sure there's coordination between their contractor, the county, DEC. And, we stand ready to work with the school district on the necessary amendments to the contract as well. So we appreciate the work that you're doing, Dr. Laura. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, Assemblywoman Levenberg.
Sure. First, again, I would also just like to echo my colleague Senator Harkin's comments. Thank you so much to all of the staff. We know that it's certainly been hard work, taking all the information in, sharing it out with the public, and pivoting when things change. And, I believe that, again, as, we all know, the governor signed into law the Save the Hudson legislation sponsored by Senator Harkin and myself, and that was in fact supported by hundreds of thousands of petition signers, 35 municipalities, and 5 counties. The intent of that law is to protect the economic vitality of this region, which the public believes was threatened by the possibility of discharging that radiological waste from the decommissioning of Indian Point into our precious river. And again, I know that there are a lot of differing opinions, but ultimately it was the public that was behind this effort and that drove it because of this great concern. As we move forward with this oversight board, it's critically important that we do so hand in hand with the public. We have great concerns about the impact that the waste from this plant and the process of taking it apart have on the environment, especially in this sensitive area with multiple environmental justice communities potentially impacted. Additionally, we are concerned that the NRC is not maintaining the same level of oversight as it does when a nuclear power plant is operational. There are different but no less impactful concerns with decommissioning, so we must maintain the highest level of scrutiny to protect the people of New York and our environment. And as much as we would like this to all be done as quickly as possible, we cannot compromise health and safety to that end, and I believe that the public has spoken. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we just check the Assemblywoman's mic, please?
Yeah.
Sounded like it cut out. Okay, excellent, thank you. Sounded like it may have cut out in the way.
I could seem like it
They
did.
got it.
Whatever. All good.
I can respond to that briefly, Tom. There's they were working on mic levels. There were some issues with some mics on the Zoom picking up, so
Okay.
that's why you just heard the adjustment, everyone. You're not going crazy.
Okay. Thanks.
I'm Jim Creighton. I'm one of the councilmen here in the town of Portland, deputy supervisor. Dr. Becker sends his apologies for not being able to be here today. But we do want to make it very clear, very happy that the governor signed the bill that was so critically important for so many people in our community. But that doesn't mean that we are not committed to making sure that this decommissioning is done safely, securely, and promptly. We want, as much as everybody, for this property to be back being productive for the community, but being done safely in a way that doesn't impact the rest of our community. There's no reason to move forward and find out we've got a problem down the road because we didn't quite get it right. We have to get it right, and we're committed to making sure that we get it right now. This pause will allow us the time while other decommissioning activities are happening to make sure that this one particular aspect of decommissioning is handled properly in a way that allows us to move forward as quickly as possible, but we want it safe. We want to be sure that our community is able to thrive for the next 100 years. It's important that we get it right now and not do it quickly and cheaply. And I know everybody in the room believes in the same thing. So hopefully we find a great way to go forward. Thank you.
Any other comments from DOB members? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to move on to state agency oversight updates, and for that, I believe we're starting with John Sipos.
Thanks, Tom. Just checking to make sure that everyone can hear me. Seems that is the case. So thank you. Nice to see folks again here from our host communities and from Holtec. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you tonight. So I'm going to start off with some review of state oversight, state reporting out from agencies regarding what has occurred in the past several months. First of all, regarding the hotline that DPS has been maintaining, that hotline remains operational. I will also say that we have not received any complaints via that in recent months. If we could go to the next slide. This is, thought it would be good to just review where we are on the continuous monitoring system that is in place. Indian Point is one of 5 sites in the country, so that's, there are roughly 65 sites around the country. It's only one of 5 that has this continuous monitoring capability. And if we could hop over to the next slide with the map. These are, I know it's very difficult to read these, but you can see them on the paper handout. These are readings that were taken on September 11th, 2023. And from the continuous monitoring system, the monitoring data reflects a continuation of historical trends which we have reported and discussed at prior meetings. If we could go to the next slide after that, just a general summary of DPS oversight activities with DPS professional technical staff. We are very fortunate at DPS to have such a good team of thorough professionals, including our state inspector, who is here with us tonight, and DPS staff have been reviewing various applications or requests by Holtec, which we have referenced here. The state agency teams, along with, I believe, from the county as well, have been present at the Holtec monthly briefings that have been provided. And Cliff also, that's our state inspector, monitors compliance with the joint proposal commitments and also the Public Service Commission order from May of 2021. So just an oversight on that, oversight view of that, and I'd like to move to an issue that we have discussed in the past regarding community risk. This is something that is very important to the state. I'm sure you've heard Tom talk about it, you've heard others talk about it, and that is the movement of spent fuel from the densely packed spent fuel pools to dry cask storage. And we have up here where we were, right in this room, probably about 8 months ago. This is from the February 2023 timeframe, and Units 1 and Unit 2 had been moved, the fuel, but there was still fuel to be moved for Indian Point Unit 3. And if we could, and the pie chart over there on the right breaks it down as to what had been previously moved and what had not, and at the bottom, 18 casks, or 30%, were complete at that time. So if we could go to slide 11, this is, in my opinion, a very important slide, and it goes to community risk. So you can see that the Unit 3 spent fuel has been moved, a great portion of it, over 80%, and as of today, it is at the marker of the 33rd cask, I believe, as of September 21st, 2023. And there was a total of 1,888 fuel assemblies that had been in the spent fuel pool. I believe as of today, it's approximately 257. That's 13%. So 87% moved, 13% going. And I just want to take some time and ask us, Senator Harcum talked about us working together and the hard work that has gone in to this whole process over the past few years. This slide shows progress it shows a reduction of risk to the host communities and the tri-state New York City metropolitan area. I believe Dave Lockmau may comment on this later on tonight, but from the state's perspective, the removal of spent nuclear fuel from densely packed spent fuel pools to dry storage casks materially improves the risk and hazard profile for the public. And while I am at it, I would like to recognize that this was a condition, it was negotiated, it was part of the joint proposal, it was part of the Public Service Commission order from May of 2021, and I would like to recognize Holtec's commitment and Holtec's work. We have many people here tonight from Holtec, and I would like to recognize that work in the reduction of risk. So thank you very much. If we could go on to slide number, I believe it's 12, some other work that our state inspector has been involved in, which concerns the spent fuel pool at Unit 3, watching the transfer of fuel that we have just been discussing, cleaning the racks. These were the important racks in Unit 2 for spent fuel. And as I said before, tracking industrial safety issues and corrective actions with prior NRC citations. If we go to the next slide, this is a continuation. This is slide 13. As many of you know, as I'm sure as some veterans recall, we have been discussing the decommissioning rule at the federal level for quite some time, I think probably even going back to the task force. I see Sandy's knowing smile there. This is something that many of us will remember. And a lot of public comments went in last August, that would be August of 2022. But, Tom and others have been looking at trends and we're understanding. Every day that passes, we understand some more, and we learn lessons. And so at the end of 3 weeks ago, DPS staff wrote a supplemental letter in this rulemaking. And the rulemaking, just for those who are following along, is NRC-2015-0070. This is a federal decommissioning rulemaking that is occurring. It started in 2014, yes, 9 years ago. And based on the lessons that we have seen, DPS has requested the NRC to consider developing an oversight program in the decommissioning arena for systemic ways to cross-compare what is going on at different agencies. And just like there's a reactor oversight process and a construction oversight process, DPS is recommending that there be a decommissioning and spent fuel storage oversight process. A rigorous standard that would allow comparisons across and among different decommissioning sites. For example, if something were to occur at Indian Point, how does that compare with what has been occurring at Vermont Yankee or Pilgrim or San Onofre out in California? How do the sites stack up against each other? How do the operators at such decommissioning sites stack up? Are there trends emerging? Are there lessons to be learned by comparing sites? And a decommissioning oversight program would set licensee expectations across the nation. This is not just here, and would keep the public informed. We believe it's an appropriate initiative for the NRC to take, and so we have a citation here for our letter. Another aspect we recommended in this letter was to protect the financial trusts that have been established for decommissioning. And again, we're just touching on the high notes here. These are all publicly available and can be reviewed. We can go to slide 14. Also, 3 weeks ago, Tom Congdon sent a letter to NRC Region 1 following up on a report from the NRC Office of the Inspector General. The OIG, or the Inspector General at NRC, was looking at how does Region 2, NRC Region 2 down in the southeastern part of the United States, how did that region approach inspections of dry cask storage facilities? And it turned out, according to the OIG report, that there were unqualified inspectors and that the inspection process used less than 20% of the total time allocated for inspection. This occurred over an 8-year period, and again, it's Region 2, Southeast United States. It's not Region 1. It's not where we are located. But Tom asked a number of questions to the NRC for follow-up regarding inspection reports for sites that are located in New York, made recommendations there for additional transparency, and we are interested in seeing the NRC's response to that, and we may be discussing that some more later on tonight. Lastly, if we could go to the next slide, we just want to make folks aware, and Tom alluded to this in his opening remarks. Earlier this week, the NRC made publicly available an inspection report for its inspection of a dry cask manufacturing facility located in Camden, New Jersey. Again, it's not Indian Point, it's the manufacturing facility in Camden, New Jersey. And it's important to recognize that the NRC concluded that there was no immediate safety concern. However, NRC did note and describe 3 violations that were associated with change in design to the structure of high storm casks. And I know that we will be hearing some more about that, possibly from Holtec, possibly from Dave Lockbaum. And that's something it's very recent. I mean, it's only been public for the last 3 days. It's under review, and I think I will just only other thing I will say about that is our New York State technical staff, so Cliff and his colleague Bridget Freimeyer, they're reviewing the federal inspection reports very carefully, and they will be engaging with the NRC to determine what the impacts are for the New York sites. And again, the last 3 letters that we have discussed are all linked here, so folks can look at it. And I think with that, I am going to turn it over to the Department of Labor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Hi. Can you hear me? On July 14th, the New York State DOL Asbestos Control Bureau was notified of a localized workforce exposure incident in Unit 2. After an investigation, 2 notices of violations were issued by New York State's Asbestos Control Bureau on August 11th, 2023. The first violation is Champion Specialties Service, LLC, 56-3.2.A, a certification and training required. An uncertified asbestos employee engaged in cutting a pipe that contained asbestos insulation. This project should have been treated as a minor asbestos project in accordance with New York State Industrial Code Rule 56, including proper training and certification in asbestos handling. Since the incident, corrective actions have been taken by Champion Specialty Services, LLC, including getting employees asbestos training and certification. The second violation, Holtec Decommissioning International, LLC, 56-1.4.E, multi-employer work sites. A work order was given to uncertified asbestos workers to cut a pipe that contained asbestos and insulation in Unit 2. The disturbed asbestos appears to have been properly addressed prior to New York State's DOL Asbestos Control Bureau's involvement, and the involved parties have taken steps to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. Assessment of any civil penalties is now under consideration. The second DOL update is employment and labor relations. On August 16th, 2023, at Holtec International, a career fair that was just for Holtec employees took place on site. 22 companies were represented and 60 employees attended. Those that couldn't attend, they are continuously working with our labor relations individuals to help them get new positions. And we continue to remain in contact with Holtec's Office of Human Resources. Additionally, warrant postponement was received on August 18th, indicating the separation of 2 employees originally planned for February 2023, and it's been postponed to December 29th, 2023. The reason for this postponement is Holtec has not received final approval from NRC for Indian Point's permanently defueled emergency plan. We continue to send monthly virtual workshop flyers as well as in person. Westchester has a upcoming career fair in October, as well as a multilingual career fair happening next week. And we share these with the employees regularly.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to turn it over to Kelly Turturro for an update from DEC.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you this evening. A few different aspects of DEC's jurisdiction. First, I'd like to talk about the requirements under the consent order that DEC has with Holtec. Our latest update there is we still continue to work through the remedial investigation work plan for the Lafarge former Spectra construction area. So Holtec submitted information to DEC in mid-July, and our DEC technical staff is reviewing that additional submission. Next slide, please, Tom. In terms of the Speedies permit, Holtec has submitted some additional information from our prior request to the company. We are expecting the remainder of the information by the end of this month. From there, DEC will review that information and determine whether or not the application is complete. So once the application, the Speedies permit application is complete, DEC will notice a draft Speedies permit for public comment, and I will keep everybody up to date on when that might happen. And then finally, we continue our oversight under the major oil storage facility license to oversee the closure and assessment of all tanks on the property. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much. I want to open the floor to discussion. I saw Dave Lockbaum's hand was up. Dave?
Yeah, this is Dave Lockbaum. I just wanted to comment about John Sipos' point about the letter that was sent in on August 31st for the decommissioning oversight process. I was heavily involved in the VACT oversight process that the NRC developed in the year 2000. It's been a great tool for safety. Before that process was developed, there were 48 plants that had to shut down for at least a year to restore safety levels within the minimum required. Since that process was developed, only 2 reactors have fallen into that regulatory doghouse, if you will. The reason is, I believe, is because the ROP more clearly defines the NRC's performance expectations, which makes it easier for the plant owners to meet or exceed those levels, and also easier for NRC inspectors to see if they're falling short. In addition, it's a great communications tool for the public for putting findings at Plant X in context with the broader universe. So I think it's been a win-win, and I hope the NRC heeds the state's recommendation to extend it to decommissioning as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. You know, John and I wear other hats at the Public Service Commission, and part of our job is to do enforcement work with respect to our oversight of utilities. And just as a simplistic way of kind of explaining this letter, in effect, what we're suggesting to the NRC is that they look for trends of noncompliance and increase enforcement relative to those trends. So to just put a finer point on the current practice, they've seen a number of violations at Indian Point. Almost all of them, I think, all of them have been identified as of low safety significance. And so there might be a view that there's nothing wrong here, the violations have been insignificant and everything is fine. But I think that what we're suggesting to the NRC is that they evaluate whether there are trends of noncompliance here that cause some greater concerns about the overall operation and take that into account as part of their enforcement. Any other comments in the discussion here? Okay. We can move to the next item, which is a presentation by our independent technical expert, David Lockbaum. Dave? I'm sorry. Oh, there was a question before you start, Dave. Victoria?
Yeah, so
Speak directly into the mic, please.
thank you for that presentation. We appreciate the transparency.
Here, she can do the talk.
Sorry, Victoria.
Hello?
There we go.
And just a reminder, please, Tom Kasmerick, please announce your name before you speak. Thank you.
Victoria Learn, Riverkeeper. Thank you so much for the presentation. We appreciate the transparency from the state. One thing I did want to raise and get on the record, we had heard from community members concerns about heaters at Pilgrim, and there were questions about whether or not there were heaters in the spent fuel pool at Indian Point. And I understand there was a response given by email by law to just put on the record so community members have that transparency, whether or not there have been heaters installed in the spent fuel pools at Indian Point, or any signs that there might be attempts to evaporate the tritiated water.
Thank you, Victoria. Yes, we did respond and stated that the state confirmed there are no heating elements brought into the Indian Point site, and I can let Rich Baroni speak for himself.
No, that's correct. We don't have heaters in any of the spent fuel pools.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Okay, Dave Blockbaum?
Yeah, this is Dave Markman. I want to talk a little bit about independent spent fuel storage installation on-site dry storage of spent fuel. Slide 2. Just for some terminology that I use throughout this presentation, when I talk about canister, it's the sealed metal canister that holds the spent fuel assemblies. The canister is then placed inside a concrete and steel cask that's provided by the garage. The cask provides radiation shielding to the workers, the radiation shielding to the canister, and also protects the canister from any external threats from missiles or.
Dave, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can I ask you to pause for a second? We're getting a bit of an echo, and it's a bit of a challenge for those of us in the room to hear your presentation. I want to give our AV team a chance to see if they can make some corrective actions. Thank you. Stand by, Dave, for a second. Dave, could you say a few words? Yeah, we're still getting the echo. Just stand by, please.
Say a few words.
Say a few words, please. Now it's just a volume issue.
Now
Speak up.
Stand by, we're almost there. Keep talking. Testing 1, 2.
Yes, we're good. Thank you so much. Thank you, team.
Slide 2, I just provide some terminology that I'll use throughout this presentation. The canister is what holds the spent fuel assemblies. It's in the center of the diagram on the left. It's a sealed cask or canister. It's placed within inside a concrete and steel cask that provides protection, radiation shielding for workers who go near the assemblies, and also provides protection for the canister from external threats like tornado-propelled missiles and whatnot. So I'm using those terminologies throughout this presentation. Slide 3, please. As John indicated, in February of this year, the NRC's Office of the Inspector General issued an audit report on its investigation into allegations it received from an NRC worker about practices performed on broadcast storage oversight by NRC Region 2, which is the southeast of the United States. Slide 4, please. The Inspector General found that Region 2 was using unqualified inspectors for doing these dry cask inspections, and that the unqualified inspectors were only providing a very small subset of the mandated inspection scope. The inspection procedures called for about 100 hours of inspection effort looking at records and whatnot, and the unqualified inspectors were spending less than 20% of that time over the years from 2012 to 2020. So the unqualified inspectors were doing basically walk-by. Sometimes the Inspector General indicated that the inspectors didn't even enter the fence. They walked around the outside of the fence to look at the cask inside. It's probably not adequate inspection. Once I saw that NRC inspection report, I looked at the NRC's oversight of dry storage at Indian Point. I found 14 publicly available NRC inspection reports for dry storage at Indian Point between the years 2010 and 2023. The reports documented the NRC's observation of several canister loadings during that period. What the inspections report did not reveal was how many inspection hours were devoted to those inspections, and while the names of the NRC inspectors were listed, their qualifications were not provided, so I had no way of determining whether they were fully qualified or not. However, the inspection reports indicated fairly robust inspections. I saw no reason to believe that they were getting the Region 2 walk-by regulations. It looked like they were pretty robust inspections of what was going on at Indian Point. So I took some comfort in it didn't look like Region 1 was afflicted with the Region 2 malaise. Next slide, please. And as John indicated, on August 31st of this year, Tom Congdon signed a letter to NRC Region 1 asking about the NRC Inspector General report. Was Region 1, or more specifically, were the inspections at Indian Point done by qualified inspectors during the full scope inspections? And as John Cyclos indicated, the NRC's hadn't responded to that letter yet, but probably will by the DOB meeting in December. Next slide, please. The reason it matters is illustrated by this curve. It's called the bathtub curve, and it shows the chance of failure over a lifetime of a product. It applies to people, it applies to products, it applies to nuclear power plants. The left-hand portion of the curve is the break-in phase or the infant mortality phase, where assembly errors, material imperfections, or user mistakes cause the failure rate to be initially high. The right-hand portion of the curve is the wear-out phase, where aging degradation causes materials to wear out, wear and tear causes the failure rate to once again climb. At no point is the risk zero, but at the two endpoints of the bathtub are where the risk is the highest. Next slide, please. The left-hand portion of the curve is a cut and paste from the Inspector General's report from February this year. Once the NRC Region 2 started using qualified inspectors doing full scope inspections, they found plenty of problems with dry cask loadings in Region 2. These were all problems during the break-in portion of the curve. A couple of them were related to Indian Point where loadings, heavy loads, the loaded cask weighed 100 tons. You pass 100 tons over buried equipment, natural gas pipelines and whatnot, and what's underground may not survive the 100 tons passing overhead. Two of the failures were involved where they didn't properly manage that risk. So it shows the importance of using qualified inspectors during full scope inspections. It's not real clear why Region 2 took shortcuts over the last decade. Next slide, please. I was looking at what happens on the wear-out phase of the curve, because all the canisters that have been loaded today are heading towards, if not already in, the wear-out portion of the bathtub curve. This is a snapshot of a report from the Electric Power Research Institute, which is a research institute funded by the nuclear industry. They've identified chloride-induced stress corrosion cracking as the primary degradation method for dry cast storage, and I agree with that. So the next question was, how is that risk being managed? Next slide, please. The NRC's Managing Aging Processes and Storage, MAPS, they love acronyms, calls for examinations every 5 years. Typically, a plant owner will pick one, perhaps two casks or canisters to be looked at over and over again every 5 years, rather than looking at more canisters than that. By looking at the same ones over and over again, that facilitates trending of degradation results. You can see how aging is progressing from year 5 to year 10 to year 15. Next slide, please. Most vulnerable, in quotes, is important if you guess right. If you pick the most vulnerable canisters, then that method works real good. If you don't guess right and don't pick the right canisters, then looking at the one or two canisters and ignoring the rest may not tell you as much as you want to know. As far as the factors that go into picking the one or two most vulnerable canisters, it's how close they are to sea spray, particularly those along the ocean coast, what type of metal was used in the canister, and what's the heat load of the spent fuel assemblies inside the canisters. Those are the factors that primarily determine most vulnerable per the industry. Next slide. The EPRI report, Electric Power Research Institute report, also identifies that another factor that can cause accelerated degradation over time is heavy grounding or mechanical damage, i.e. gouges on the outside surface of the canister. That provides a crevice or a starting point for cracking to then propagate from that initial weakness. Next slide, please. In the last few years, I've had to replace 2 of my car windshields because a stone chipped a small chip in the windshield, which then propagated across the windshield, and I had to replace the windshield. Similarly, if you have a crevice or a crack in the outside surface of a canister, that provides a starting point for a crack to then propagate larger and through wall, perhaps through wall of the canister's metal walls. Next slide. After a near miss in August of 2017 at San Onofre, California, Voltec prepared these slides and conceded that basically scratches or gouges or imperfections in the outer surface of canisters happen everywhere and are commonplace. They're not isolated instances. They occur here, there, and everywhere, to quote a Beatles song. Next slide. That same Voltec presentation said, it doesn't really matter because, quote, the scratches are, quote, are not relevant to safety determination, end quote. And I guess I disagree with that notion because EPRI knows have indicated that they are a factor in aging degradation, the primary aging degradation mechanism. So the more scratches you have, the more likely you are to invite this degradation mechanism to your facility. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to almost wrap up by referring back to the bathtub curve. The reason it's important to get this right is because failure is high initially in life during the break-in phase, and again rises in the wear-out phase towards the end of life. The NRC needs to perform full scope inspections using qualified inspectors, not just whoever's available. In addition, the periodic examinations of dry cast storage systems must be based on science rather than convenience if we have any hope of getting it right. My last slide, next slide, the last slide. John Cycles mentioned earlier that the state's agreement with Holtec accelerated the transfers from spent fuel pools into the pads. This chart from the NRC shows the risk reduction that John spoke to. The solid line is the former practice where you left the spent fuel pools filled until the nuclear plant shut down. The dotted line shows the risk reduction you get by transferring the fuel from the pools to the pads. The risk goes down dramatically both from a security standpoint and from a safety standpoint. It doesn't go to zero, but it's much less, and the state deserves a lot of credit, and Holtec, for accelerating the transfers and reducing that threat profile. One last point about the cracking of dry storage canisters. If a through-wall crack were to form in a canister wall, it's not like popping a balloon. All the radioactive contents of the canister won't be discharged into the environment. Very little to no radiation will escape through that crack. But that crack could reduce the structural integrity when that canister is finally lifted from the cask and transported off-site for disposal or interim storage or whatever the next phase is. So it's important that we don't have through-wall cracks that impair the canister's integrity, reduce its structural strength, and leave it prone to failures once it's handled down the road in the future. Thank you. I'd be glad to answer any questions if I can.
Thank you, Dave. Just a shout out of appreciation for Dave's work. Shortly after the NRCIG report came out, I get in my inbox a summary of the findings, along from our own staff, was Dave Lochbaum, giving his points of view on the significance of the findings from the IG. And then immediately took it upon himself to dive into the records at Indian Point to evaluate the inspections that occurred there, so that he could provide the briefing to us and tonight's presentation. So, just Dave, thank you for just continuing to have the initiative to bring issues to our attention, to try to consolidate into a digestible form complex information that exists throughout the NRC docket. Can't thank you enough for your dedication and your volunteerism to this board.
You're very welcome.
Any questions for Dave? Yes, Susan?
Thank you. Susan Spear. I also want to echo what Tom Congdon just said, thanking Dave Lochbaum for this excellent information. I wanted to ask, do you think the NRC inspection process, if done appropriately, Region 2 notwithstanding, would be sufficient to identify some of these cracks that you speak about in your report?
I have some doubts about that because it really depends on how effective selecting the two most vulnerable canisters are. The one silver lining to that is that the inspections are being done across the nation, and as more and more inspections are done, we'll have better information about what the aging mechanisms are and what are the most vulnerable canisters. And to the NRC's credit, they're very good at adjusting the inspection regimes and what they expect owners to do based on emerging information. So it's not like it's fixed from 2 years ago or 5 years ago. As new information comes forward, if there's shortcomings, the NRC will require those gaps to be addressed. So that gives me some comfort that why the selection of the most vulnerable is a little bit suspect right now. If it's wrong in the future, it will be identified and fixed in time.
Thank you.
Dave, do you want to speak to the challenge of expanding beyond the most vulnerable casks for inspection? That there's some countervailing arguments for why it might be challenging to say just inspect all on the site.
That's a good point. I've looked at how inspections were done at other sites, and there is a radiation dose to the workers that are performing the inspections. What happens is that inspection equipment is lowered into the annulus space between the cask and the canister to look at the outside surface of the canister, and the workers that are operating that equipment do receive a radiation dose. It's not lethal, but the lowest reasonably achievable standard for minimizing dose to the public and the workers means that you don't want to do inspections unless you really have to do them. So I think there's a balance there. I think we could do a little bit better, but I can understand why, particularly if I was one of the workers, I wouldn't want to inspect every canister because I'd pick up a dose that I would like to avoid.
Thank you. Other questions, observations? Yeah.
Just a brief question. On slide 17, you provided the risk profile on a number of stages 1 through 5. Would you tell us which stage you consider us at this point? Are we in stage 4 or stage 5?
Yeah, stage 5 is a plant that is permanently shut down. They're not adding any more spent fuel to the pool. And in both the dotted line case, the accelerated transfer, or the solid line case, the permanent practice, you're unloading the spent fuel pool after the reactor is permanently shut down, as Indian Point has currently, as a few years ago.
So we're at stage 5?
Yes, stage 5 is permanently shut down. Reactor is permanently shut down. You're unloading the spent fuel pool onto the pad.
Yeah, and from John Sipos' earlier presentation, that slide showing where we are with the loading of the dry casks. Unit 1, Unit 2 is 100% complete, and Unit 3 is at 86%, so that does put us squarely in stage 5.
One of the reasons, the paragraph right underneath the chart kind of explains why the risk is reduced. Each canister at Indian Point holds 32 fuel assemblies. The reactor cores held 193 fuel assemblies each, and the spent fuel pool had several hundred canisters. So held several hundred fuel assemblies. The higher amount of fuel assemblies meant that there was more likelihood to have an accident, and if you had an accident, there's more radioactive material to be released. That's why the pool was a much higher risk than a dry storage.
Thank you, Dave. Yes, Victoria?
So I think this goes a bit to Susan's prior question. So with Victoria Learn, Riverkeeper, with scratches being so commonplace, from your technical perspective, do you think it is possible to truly identify what the most vulnerable cask is, with the scratches being a factor to that and so many of the canisters possibly having these scratches?
I think so. I think if you examine a canister before it's put into a cask to see what its surface look like, not all of the scratches or gouges will be of equal depth. So you want to identify the largest scratches, the deepest scratches, the ones that are very, you can detect them, but they're not very deep. Those would be a lesser priority than the ones that are deeper and longer. So I think you can characterize the canisters if you inspect them before you put them in the canister, and then look at a couple of the worst gouged or worst scratched canisters periodically to see if they're degrading. If they are degrading, you might want to expand and look at some of the other scratched canisters. If they're not degrading, then you may say, I picked the worst one and it's surviving well enough that I don't need to expand my sample scope. But to ignore the scratch surfaces is not the right answer.
A follow-up question, do you know if the canisters have been inspected in that way at Indian Point? Are we able to know which canisters have the deepest scratches, the most significant gouges at this point? Because a number of them have already been loaded.
Yeah, my understanding is that they do not look at the outer surfaces of the canisters. And that's not just at Indian Point, that's more nationwide. And even after the near miss in 2017 at San Onofre, they still don't inspect the outside surfaces.
Rich or Pat, do you guys want to address the identification of most vulnerable?
This on? Yeah, I'll follow up. I know we have the advantage of 2 abandoned turbine decks, so we do store our MPCs on the turbine decks. Now, whether we do a full-scale inspection on that, I'll follow up and find out. But if there was any drastic scratches or gouges, we would pick that up, at least with the MPCs staged on the turbine decks themselves.
Thank you.
This is Dave Wampum. One follow-up. I recently had a Zoom call with the folks at San Onofre in California, and one of the questions I asked them is if before you transport a canister off-site, you inspect it before then, and they said for the most cases they do. There's a few exceptions to that, but even if you're not looking at it throughout the lifetime of storage on site, it does look like the canisters are inspected before they'd be loaded and transported off-site, which is good. It could be better, but it's better than nothing.
Any question?
Thank you. Yes, Assemblywoman?
So can you just clarify again, Dave, because I'm not 100% clear I understand. So right now, and anybody else can also weigh in here, the canisters themselves have already been loaded into the dry casks. So there's not an opportunity now to inspect them until such time as they would be transported? Or are the dry casks going to be opened up and then they're inspected periodically? I think maybe I'm just not 100% understanding what the process is.
This is Dave Lockman. That's a good question. Every 5 years, workers can inspect the outer surfaces of the most vulnerable canisters. They basically essentially drop a borescope in that space between the canister and the cask to look at the outside surface of the canister. In addition, a few canisters have been opened up after storage to look at the condition of the fuel assemblies inside. That's not done routinely, but it has been done at some of the plants some of the canisters that were loaded back in 1986, the first ones that were loaded. So some canisters are open to look at the fuel inside, and periodic, every 5 years, canisters at every site are looked at for the outer surfaces of the canisters.
But right now, your particular concern is highlighting what's been stored that is now ready to be moved, not necessarily what's been most recently stored. In other words,
it's a little both. I'm a little suspect about how they pick the most vulnerable 1 or 2 canisters that are looked at. I don't think that's scientifically robust. In addition, it's before a canister is loaded and transported off-site, it's imperative that it be inspected to make sure that it's in good condition and hasn't deteriorated over the years of on-site storage, because it could fail en route.
Right, but absent any plans in the foreseeable future for moving these casks, what we're talking about really is inspection at the dry pad at Indian Point. So this 5-year routine looking at the most vulnerable as the proxies for the condition of all the others that are on the dry pad, the dry cast pad.
But we just established that they haven't really been inspected for cracks and scratches before they were loaded in. So how would you identify which were the most vulnerable?
So Pat O'Brien, Director of Government Affairs and Communications, Tech. These casks, when they come to site, go through quality control. They are checked.
The casks?
Yes.
Not the canisters. We're talking about two different things, right?
MPC,
The canisters and the casks,
the
right?
canisters inside and the casks external.
Say it again?
Both casks and canisters come from our factory in Camden. They have been quality controlled to get to the site, and they have been looked at and inspected. If there's issues there ahead of time, we wouldn't accept them to the site, or we actually really wouldn't let them leave the factory. So yes, they've been looked at. Once they are then loaded, they go inside the cask, they go out to the pad. At 20 years, you start the aging management process that Dave's talking about, where you're opening up the cask to look at the MPC. And you're doing that every 5 years consistently to look for trends. So yes, they have been looked at before they're loaded with fuel. Once they go to the cask at that 20-year .4 loading. So when
Are they looked at between, after they're loaded with the fuel before they're loaded into the cask? In other words, couldn't the scratching happen at that point from the loading of the fuel into the canister?
Not based on how you load these and lower them. These are loaded into the spent fuel pool in a high track. Goes into the pool, gets loaded, comes out, is dried, robotically welded, and then moved and downloaded very slowly, very methodically into the overpacks, and then the overpacks are transported out. So that's a process that's very controlled, with a lot of eyes on it when it happens. That's why these take about a week a cask to load. It's start to finish moving these things. This is not something that happens quickly. So you can identify any issues along the way.
This is Dave Lockman. I would disagree with it because the scratching on the canister at San Onofre occurred during the loading and transfers.
San Onofre is a
That's a
different
different
design though,
technology.
David. It's a UMAX system. It is not the systems we have at Indian Point.
I understand that, but you're moving two pieces with very small tolerances. It's pretty easy to get out of whack as you did at San Onofre. So that sounds great, but I'm not buying it.
Okay.
That's fine.
So,
Hey, I'd just like to ask, I'd just actually just like to add for clarification, so when we're hearing this acronym MPC,
Multi-purpose canister.
right, and that is an alternative way of
Multi-purpose canister
referring to a
holds the fuel.
canister, and the canister, the MPC canister, then goes into the cask.
Correct.
Just-
And it's
Just so we're all clear on our terms for tonight.
Correct, and it's multi-purpose because the theory is you can then take that out of the overpack and put that into a transportation cask to be moved to an interim or permanent repository.
okay, so I'm sorry, just to continue. First of all, I do want to thank Dave for his continued vigilance and looking and helping us all evaluate the processes. I think that's really important. But it does also, just continue to prove our concern about the NRC's oversight that is not the be-all and end-all, and that we need to continue to make sure, again, that there are additional processes in place that satisfy our belief that as we proceed with the process, that we're doing it in a safe manner. I don't think we can just rely on the NRC, as we have not been doing, and I appreciate the letters to have that continued vigilance. And not only, we're seeing, obviously, as soon as the plants stop operating, that we don't have that same level of oversight, and we need it. So, I'm grateful, but I'm also concerned by what Dave's brought up, because it seems like we don't even at this point have a process in place to actually inspect the canisters before they get loaded in, to make sure that we know which ones are the most likely to decay or whatever would happen to something with a scratch or a dent or whatever. And I guess the other question is, I'm not 100% sure. I know that you said, Dave, we wouldn't really have to be concerned about leaks. So what is it exactly that happens? What is the concern besides the transit portion that we would be most concerned about if canisters fail?
This is Dave Lockman. The original canisters were designed for a number of problems or postulated accidents, like dropping a canister as it's being lowered from the refueling floor, 18 to 30 feet, depends on the canister and so on. But those studies, which are backed up by actually dropping canisters to see how they survive, are based on the canister being in pristine condition. If you have a through-wall crack and were to drop a canister or have some other kind of handling accident, its structural integrity may not keep the fuel inside, as the original studies have shown. So that's why guarding against cracks is important, to make sure that the radioactivity stays on the inside and doesn't get out into the environment.
But again, it sounds to me like it's more of a concern when you transport or move those canisters out of the dry cask. So in other words, if they just maintained and stayed in the dry casks for millions of years, it wouldn't make much of a difference to have cracks and scratches. Is that true, or?
This is Dave Lockman. That's correct. That's the primary threat, is when you move it, if its structural integrity is impaired, it may not survive the movement. In a static condition, cracking is not nice, but it's not as naughty.
Thanks. Victoria has another question, Tom.
Follow up on that. So events like natural disasters, possible attacks, would that also be a vulnerability if the cask was compromised?
It would reduce the, this is Dave Lockman, it would reduce the margins of those kind of challenges, but there was an EPRI study that showed that the crack would have to be several feet long for example, an earthquake to cause it to break apart. So it reduces the margin, but there's quite a bit of margin for natural events. It's mainly once you pick it up, start putting more force on the walls. If those walls are impaired, then they may fail.
Thank you. So to just wrap up this discussion, we do have an outstanding information request into the NRC. We have confirmed they are working on a response, and I'm hopeful that I'll have more to report back to the DOB at the December meeting. And if warranted, we will be inviting the NRC back to help explain their response. So with that, I think we can turn to the next item on the agenda, which is the update by Holtec on activities at the site. Rich Baroni.
Hey, so good evening. I'm Rich Baroni. Just as an update, Holtec has selected me to be the chief nuclear officer for the company. So this will be my last presentation here at the DOB meeting. I did want to say goodbye to Richard Webster, but I'll just send him an email.
I think he's monitoring online, so.
All right. Hey, so,
congratulations.
Hey, so in the future, my successor, along with Pat, will do the presentations. As you can see, as we go further in the process, we'll need more and more corporate discussions and corporate clarifications on some of the work that we're doing. Okay, so with that said, let's go to the next slide, please. So agenda is typically what we do every DOB, right? So we'll talk about the asphyxie pad, where we are with that. Unit 2 spent fuel pool status. Unit 3 spent fuel status. The discharge discussion we'll have. Vessel segmentation at both units. We'll talk about some NRC inspections and activities and some of our safety issues. Next slide. So the asphyxie pad, since our last oversight board meeting, the vehicle barrier wall installation is in progress. A security support structure is in progress, and our additional fence line installation is in progress. Additionally, we're working on some microwave units that will be used for security purposes. By the next decommissioning oversight board meeting, all construction activities will be complete and fuel on pad protected will be projected for November 15th, which actually means it's going to be the asphyxie pad itself will be the protected area of the site. So if we go to the next slide, we could point out some of the work that we're doing. The arrow all the way on the right shows the additional fence line that's being installed. It shows the next arrow shows the vehicle barrier wall that's being installed. And then the last arrow on the left shows the new security building that's being put in place. All told, like I've said in previous discussions, there'll be 127 casks on both pads. We do an inspection every shift, once a day, by the operators. They do it around, and they just verify that there's no visual issues with the high storms that are on the pad itself. Next slide. So the Unit 2 spent fuel pool defuel status, as we've discussed, the Unit 2 defuel status is complete. There's no more fuel in that pool. We're in the process of cleaning the fuel racks. That's in progress. That should wrap up by the end of this week, tomorrow. And then we're doing RAD surveys of the fuel racks. That's in progress. That should wrap up on Monday. Once that's done, we'll commence the removal of the spent fuel racks from the pool. They'll get bagged and shipped to our depository in Texas. That should start within the next 2 weeks. I believe it'll complete prior to the next DOB meeting. Next slide for Unit 3. We're in our last phase, like John described. Go back one, please. Last phase, like John described. Right now, the fuel offload is in progress. During this meeting, we transferred 1 cask. So as of today, there are 8 casks that remain in the pool. By December 6th, obviously, the fuel offload will be complete by mid-October. It's about another 3 or 4 weeks, and then we'll commence the rack cleaning. All right, so our discharge discussion update. So based on the passage of the bill to prevent effluent discharge to the Hudson River in connection with the decommissioning of nuclear power plant, we are reviewing all available options for the disposal of radioactive or radiological effluents. Impact to the overall schedule is being evaluated. I was pretty adamant about that last meeting, if you run the tape. All right, we'll evaluate the schedule and see what the impact is. Unit 2 vessel segmentation is the next slide. We completed our steam generator, reactor coolant system, primary pipe preps with chemical cleaning. So actually do some chemical cleaning of the steam generator tubes themselves. That cleaning will probably start in the first quarter of 2024. And then through the next meeting, we'll continue with the equipment setup for segmentation activities. That includes installation of platforms, an aux bridge, and a gantry saw, where we'll start cutting the upper internals. And then for the cavity floor, we'll install floor plates, and to keep the pool clean, tri-nuke filters and vacuum equipment gets installed in the cavity itself. Keeps clarity for the workers as they do the segmentation work. Next slide, please. For Unit 3, we've completed boxing all of the Unit 3 Bravo Charlie waste. That's just the level of radiation that the waste contained. And so those are stored on site in our flex building now. And we removed in-core thimble tubes. There's 53 of those. The thimble tubes were actually used during plant operation to monitor core characteristics. And if we had to make any adjustments with boron or rods, we would do that based on the data from the detectors that went in and out of the reactor itself. So projected activities through December 6th. We'll continue cutting and prepping Unit 3 piping for the steam generator chemical cleaning. That'll be done also, like we're doing in Unit 2. And we'll continue preps for the Unit 3 core barrel removal. So that's the next big step. The vessel segmentation at Unit 3 is removal of the core barrel itself. Next slide. This is a repetitive slide. It's NRC inspections. Discussions with the NRC. We're pretty confident that once we get fuel on pad protected, the permanently defueled emergency plan LAR and exemption will be granted. We're also looking for, if you go to that last block, the asphyxia-only E-plan, asphyxia-only tech specs, and asphyxia-only security plan. So asphyxia is the PAD, right? So it's Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation. That's just the acronym. Upcoming NRC inspections, we have a graded in Class C and a 50-59 inspection September 18th through the 21st. We just had an inspection last week where the NRC inspector did look at the asphyxia pad, did look at some of our procedures, and there were no issues. We have a radway storage and transportation inspection in October. We have another asphyxia inspection for continuous loading in October the 2nd through the 6th. And then you can see there's a dosimetry inspection and a year-end inspection to close out 2023. Right now in this quarter, we have no NRC noted violations. The quarter ends in 2 weeks. Next slide. These are the NRC inspection activities from the second quarter of 2023. We did get 3 non-cited level 4 violations. The first one was failure to follow procedures for control of hot work. Didn't do really a good job on looking at the areas surrounding some welding activities. We talked to the individuals, we had the area cleaned up, and then we continued the work. The next slide really ties to the shipment from Oyster Creek, where there were 2 hot spots identified by our technicians when the material was received at site. One was over 200 milliram, one was about 400 milliram on top of the package that was received. So we did a good job in identifying it, we did a good job of securing it, but we did not do a good job of immediately notifying the NRC, right? And that was what the requirement was. We had to brush up on the procedure so it was perfectly clear, and we did that. But that was the genesis behind that violation. And then the last violation It really has to do with the design staff that designed the high lift that's allowing us to do all this fuel moves in Unit 3. We should have had a better CFC or certificate of conformance with a specific valve from a seismic perspective. We didn't get that done. The engineers didn't get that done until they were prompted by the NRC. They got the CFC, and there was no issue with the component or the valve itself. So actions to restore compliance, all of these were issued, all of these were noted in our corrective action program. Corrective actions were established to preclude recurrence. Specifically, procedures were revised for clarity, right? And we also provided some on-the-spot training just to make sure that we'll preclude recurrence, it won't happen again. But I think the most important part here is since licensee placed the deficiency into its corrective action program, the violations were inapprehensible. Very low safety significance, and because the violation was not willful or repetitive, those violations are being treated as non-cited violations consistent with section right there of the enforcement policy. I do agree with what you're saying, Tom, about the number of violations. I have talked to our Vice President of Reg Assurance in Camden, Gene Fleming. There are some other issues at other facilities where we're seeing these level 4s and some level 3s, right? So we are getting an independent person to come in and do an assessment of all the violations in the fleet, and just to see what corrective actions we could generate to preclude recurrence. So we are on top of it. We're not happy with these. We have to turn this around. Next slide. I think this is a little too premature to discuss right now, but this is the issue where, in layman's terms, the MPC that we talked about has spacers. And those
Multi-purpose canister.
Multi-purpose canister. And the reason why it's a multi-purpose canister is because that canister could be used to transport fuel in a transfer cask, right? Not only that, it sits on the pad. So there are spacers that were at one point welded to the MPC grid where we load the fuel. The design was changed. Instead of welding, we bolted it. NRC feels that that should have been a process that should have been reviewed and approved by the NRC. We, as Holtec, do not agree with that assumption. We are going to the NRC. In fact, Dr. Singh is going to the NRC mid-October to discuss our position, and it's in accordance with what's called the choice letter, right? And so if you read the inspection, report, it tells you have a choice to either accept the violations, right, or do a what we call a what was it called?
Pre-decisional enforcement.
Thank you very much. A pre-decisional enforcement conference, which is what we're going to do, right? So we'll go down in October, discuss these issues. We believe that these won't be violations. That's why I'm thinking we could have held off on this, but it's there, so we'll have a discussion. That all makes sense? Okay. Last but not least is our safety discussion here. Not proud of this one either, right? And the guys are really trying hard, right, to confirm to our standards. In fact, we brought in an independent person on site, right, to do a full-blown apparent cause evaluation to really determine what's the issue with the safety issues. Why are we seeing these first aids, and why are we seeing these OSHA restricted duty or recordables, right? So we've had all employee meetings. We had one where everybody joined, all the guys that you see behind me, they all came to the meeting. We kind of reinforced what our standards are, right? And listen, we don't want people going home getting hurt, right? You go home, right? You come to work, you do a day's work, but it all goes out the window if somebody gets hurt, right? So we're trying to really drive home procedure adherence, enforcement of standards, and really thinking about you guys at home, your loved ones at home, right? And do you really want to put yourself at risk, right, and affect that family environment, right? So that's kind of the issues that we're pushing. Been very receptive by the guys. We really appreciate that. Every day there's safety briefings. No matter what department or what activity you go to, there's safety discussions every single day, including my 8 o'clock meeting. Cliff can attest to that, right? So we discuss safety every day. Got to turn this around. In the Camden facility, they just had a 1,000-day run where they had no OSHA recordables. We got to get there. We need to get there. Right now, we're on a 70-day run, all right, so I'm appreciative of that, but it's nowhere near 1,000 days. We've got to continue to work on that.
Who has
Getting
1,000
full
days?
cooperation with the unions.
Our manufacturing facility in Camden.
Okay.
Again, full cooperation with the unions. They're doing a great job, right? Just got to make sure we keep eyes on path and turn this around. But that's all I have pending any
Did you
questions.
want to react to the Department of Labor asbestos issue at all? That was reported out by Rachel?
Again, that was captured in our corrective action program. Shouldn't have occurred, right? We did some training, right? We turned that around. In fact, we just had a big asbestos job that we just finished, and based on some of the corrective actions from that, we employed those with the latest job that we did. Those were legitimate issues.
Yeah, thank you. Questions for Rich?
It was a great report. I just have a quick question on in your level 4 items that were identified by the NRC.
What page?
The second one regarding, this is page 11 of your report.
Okay.
I just want to compliment your workers on catching something that came from the Jersey site, and you guys caught it as soon as it came to the plant. We really appreciate that. I'm interested in, well, 2 things. One is, was this a one-off, or are we expecting more shipments from New Jersey? And then the second is, what's being done to, you've got corrective actions were established to preclude recurrence. Is that nothing else is coming, or something else?
The actions for us were to make sure if we get another shipment like that, right, that we immediately notify the NRC. That's why we received the violation. Otherwise, we wouldn't have. As far as Oyster Creek is concerned, or Pilgrim, or Palisades, right, we all share the incident with those 3 other sites. Unfortunately, Oyster Creek got a level 3 civil penalty, right, so they've put corrective actions in place. They put a root cause team in place. Yes, for this incident, right? So they've put corrective actions in place to preclude recurrence also. So actually what happened...
really started there.
Yeah, it started there. So simply put, they wrapped up a piece of equipment that was contaminated that we can use and can be transported safely. However, when they cinched down on the outer casing, right, it transferred the contamination up to above the casing itself. So there were only 2 spots on top. Nobody really got affected by it and we went through all of that data. It's unfortunate.
Are we expecting more shipments? I'm sorry, Jim Creighton,
I won't say no, but I'll tell you that the corrective actions they put in place should prevent that from happening again.
And this is for B and C that gets segmented and sent back
It was
out
for
to
it was for a
Texas?
component that we use for segmentation of the vessel.
Susan?
Yeah. Hi, Susan Spear, thank you. I wanted to follow up on that same issue. While I certainly recognize that a delayed report is of concern, I feel like that's sort of the wrong problem here. I mean, I guess I'd like to better understand what exposure the workers had during this incident and why another plant can send contaminated instruments to Indian Point, or any other plant for that matter. It seems to me like it shouldn't be allowed in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. That's why we have an issue. I agree with you 100%.
Well, did the workers get any exposure when they identified the problem? I mean, hats
No,
off to
as
them for
fact,
identifying.
when the shipment came, right, we did a thorough search, right, and we picked up on the 2 hot spots. There was just 2, well, I won't say just, there was 2 hot spots on the container itself. Right?
And
it was
when they
just a
did that
nor-
identification, there was no exposure in that process?
Correct.
To those workers?
Correct.
And what about during the transport process? Sorry.
I can't hear you.
No.
While it was being transported, what about during transport?
We looked at that, right? And?
No issue for the public. It's all within the DOT guidelines for shipment.
So how did the workers find it? Were they
We
checking?
did the survey of the component when it arrived on site, as per our procedure.
Is that a standard practice?
Correct. Yes. The person who spoke was Ray Fuchek. He's our RP manager.
Thank you, I appreciate the info, and glad there was no exposure. I just really do have a concern with contaminated equipment and materials being brought, being transferred from plant to plant. I mean, you said that you do share equipment with other plants.
If it's properly boxed and it's properly protected, it's not an issue. In this case, it wasn't. In this case, the issue was identified, and in this case, it was entered in the corrective action program.
Rich, would it be that the tool would go from a hot area and then be used in a hot area where
Yeah.
it was being delivered
Absolutely.
to? So the idea here is that it's in a hot area, so the workers that would be using the tool would have to be wearing all of the protective equipment,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Admittedly, they should have done, Oyster Creek should have done a better job cleaning the component.
Okay, thank you.
And that's why they got the level 3
Right.
citation. So it's actually good that they caught it at Indian Point.
Yes.
And
it was,
my
but-
understanding in the report was that they took readings in the cab of the truck to determine the driver
Absolutely.
received no exposure, or below limits or whatever.
Below limits, that's correct.
And just to clarify the record, could we get the name of your colleague who spoke?
Mr. Raymond Fuchek.
Thank you.
He is our radiation protection manager at Indian Point.
Rich, question, in previous meetings, we've had a look at the full schedule and some anticipation of heavy demolition activities, and as you know, we want to stand up the community air monitoring program. The school reported out that they're setting up their own monitoring program as well. So could you just speak to when the earliest date is that you're anticipating any kind of dust generating heavy demolition?
Good question. Since everything is interconnected, right, and the effluent we cannot discharge effluent any longer, we have to review the schedule. We have to determine the impact of the schedule. So I can't give you a direct answer on that as to when that would happen. However, I will tell you this. The Reuters-Stokes monitors, there are 16 total that John talked about. We don't need to have those in service any longer once we go on fuel and pad protected. However, I told the guys I want 4 of them along Broadway kept in service to help with the community monitoring program, if that's going to help at all.
Thank you.
I
Dan, did you
just have
a
one
question?
follow-up
Yeah.
question. It's kind of related, and Rich, I don't know if you want to try to answer it, but back to the question of the canisters. If there was in fact something wrong or, with the canister and you needed to move the spent fuel in one canister to a better canister, is that something that can still happen at this point, or are we getting rid of the infrastructure to transfer the rods from one canister to another if that needed to be done?
I'm trying to understand the question. Typically, here's what happens. An MPC is the canister that holds the fuel.
Yeah.
Correct? Within that canister, it's called like a honeycomb, but it's a basket, right? And that basket is centered within the MPC. So if you're going back to the issue that the NRC potentially has, right? To center that basket in the MPC, 12-foot-long shims are used to center it. And initially, the shims were welded to the basket. Design change came through that said, we don't have to weld it, we could bolt it. That's all it is just a shim.
It
that
actually
maintains-
wasn't related to the design change. It was related to Dave's.
I
comment.
understand what you were asking,
Okay.
Assemblywoman. So the cash transfer pit remains. The need to move an MPC between overpacks would not really be a necessity, but there is that ability because you would use that cash transfer pit if you were going to transfer to a transportation cast. So there is infrastructure to move the MPC. They are welded shut. They are backfilled with helium. They are monthly or weekly. They do the surveys on each cask. So you can identify through the RP surveys if there was ever to be an issue related to radiation on these MPCs and the canisters. So based on if an issue ever occurred, and just to be clear, there's never been a crack of any of Holtec's canisters anywhere in the world. The only leaks you've ever seen in any dry storage canisters are on those that are bolted with a gasket, and you find that gasket weld. That is not our design. Our design is robotically welded on. So depending on what the issue is where you would design kind of the transfer. So theoretically, you could build a larger MPC that then you could place the other MPC inside of, and then put that in an overpack. So you would not take the fuel outside and move it between MPCs. That's not how it would be done, but it really would be depending on what an issue is. You would do your corrective actions and your plan to recover to meet your certificate of compliance in that manner.
You just said robotic welding, not
Yes, so-
bolting, but you just said you're changing it to bolting, not welding.
No. So the bolting he's talking about, that's right, I knew he was going down the wrong
Okay,
path for your
no,
question.
because you went back to.
Yeah,
that
the bolting was
conversation.
tied to that question that, the inspection report that came out on Camden
Right.
earlier this week. So that's actually the honeycomb inside of an MPC. That's where the weld and bolt change happens. So
I-
it's not external to anything, it's internally in what is robotically welded shut. Yeah.
Okay,
All right?
okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I believe Dave Blockbaum has his hand up. Dave?
This is Dave Hoffman. First, Rich, I appreciate all the helpful information you provided me over the last year plus. We answered every question I had very candidly, and I appreciate that. The question I have is, you mentioned that you're having an independent person come in and look at the corrective actions at Indian Point and some of other Holtec sites. Will that independent consultant's, at least a summary of what the independent consultant found and recommended, will Holtec be making that available?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And it's been a pleasure working with you, Dave, for the whole time being.
Victoria, did you have a question?
Yeah. Victoria Laring, Riverkeeper. This may be a bit premature, but I was wondering if you could talk about what available options you are reviewing for the discharges?
Right now, we're not able to, right now, we're not going to discuss that. Right? There are multiple options we could look at. Those are all being under review.
And a follow-up question, have you had any discussions with regulators about the possible available options?
We'll have that discussion, I'm sure, here at the DOB.
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up question regarding your approach to this alternatives analysis, which is, what is your objective in looking at these alternatives? In other words, we as a DOB and in the joint proposal are seeking safe, prompt, and thorough decommissioning, right? Are those the guiding principles that you will apply to your evaluation of the alternatives?
That's why you're here.
I figured as much. I knew you brought me for a reason. So again, I think we will look at all options against the schedule and what a proposed schedule may be. I think the obvious answer, what you're probably going to ask is, would there be major schedule impacts that could affect the length of the project? We're not there yet in the evaluation. Obviously, when we put the schedule together for these projects, it took years to do. So now you're looking to, kind of reconfigure those. But I will say, if you look at other facilities that we have had the same issue, Pilgrim, which was much further along in decommissioning, really all we have left up there is a reactor building, a turbine building, and one support building. That was a 4-year add to that, just that project at a 1-unit site. So I would anticipate we'll look at all available options that are allowable, but there will be a schedule impact. I don't think you can avoid it.
Not only that, right? Dave listed 4 or 5 different options, right, that we have. We'll look at those also, right? We always go back to his first option, right, and the least risk to the public was discharge to the river. So we'll look at all the options.
Other questions for Holtec? All right. We are very unusually ahead of schedule. And I think we can turn now to the public statement hearing portion of this meeting. And for that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tom Kesmerick to run us through that program. Tom?
Thank you, Tom. Just a reminder, for those who, attendees who pre-registered to speak will be called on in the order in which they registered. We're going to start this evening, actually, with individuals participating by Zoom. And just a reminder that your line will be unmuted when it's your turn to speak. So those listening online can be aware, the first three will be Michelle Lee, Manna Jo Green, and then Ellen Weininger. So Michelle will unmute you in a moment here. Those who are unable to speak this evening will be directed to additional opportunities on subsequent slides. But again, to provide a fair opportunity for everyone to speak, we'll impose a 3-minute time limit on statements. Speakers will be cut off if they exceed that time limit, so just please respect the other individuals in the room and online and offer them an opportunity as well. So again, I'll turn it to Michelle Lee. You'll be our first speaker this evening, and I'll give you cues for when you're coming up on time. Michelle?
Great, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Terrific. And I have my little timer up in front of me, too. Okay, so first of all, I want to express the utmost gratitude to Governor Kathy Hochul for signing the Safe Hudson bill, and to Senator Harkin and Assemblywoman Levenberg and many other legislators at both the state and national level that joined in the bipartisan support of the bill. And I urge the state officials here and elsewhere to work with Holtec to ensure responsible on-site storage of the contaminated wastewater. And on this point, I'd argue that the pre-treatment surveys of the full contamination load, so that would include the radionuclides and other chemicals, should be made public. This is extremely important for overall state and national information. There's no rationale for it being considered proprietary. And on the point of alternatives, I would just say that Holtec puts itself out as manufacturing the best storage system on the planet. It can hold the most dangerous material, high levels of nuclear fuel, no problem for decades and decades, 100 years, transportation, everywhere, right? But somehow cannot have the expertise, the technical capability to figure out a way to store it in tanks on site. That doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. I also, just going back to being grateful, I want to thank the DOB. I think this has been an excellent and very informative meeting. It's really exactly what the public had envisioned when we pressed for the creation of the Decommissioning Oversight Board, and I have enormous optimism that going forward, you're going to be the model for the country, which is incredibly important, because as the facts brought out tonight demonstrate, we need state eyes on these sites. And so thank you. And I'm going to actually end a second before I have to.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Manna Jo Green. Manna, you're unmuted. Manna, can you hear us?
She might be on a phone line, calling in on a phone line, but listening on Zoom or watching on Zoom. So maybe give the instructions to
Manna, if you can hear us, we'll try reaching back out to you. We don't see your phone number on, but we'll, if you join us again in a little bit, we'll. I'm sorry. Manna, can you hear us?
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we
Yes, we
can.
can.
We can hear you, Manna.
Could you call on somebody else and let me be next, because I was in transit?
Sure.
Understood. Thank you, Manna. Next is Ellen Weininger. We'll come back to Manna when we can, but then after that it will be Joshua Raderman and then Margaret Rubik. So Ellen?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Thank you. My name is Ellen Weininger. I am the Director of Educational Outreach at Grassroots Environmental Education, a science nonprofit based in New York. I also live right here in Westchester. We wanted to commend Governor Hochul for signing the Save the Hudson Bill into law to protect our precious water supply from being turned into a radioactive dumping ground, which would have devastated our vibrant, multi-billion-dollar Hudson Valley economy that employs tens of thousands of workers. We are also grateful to Assembly Member Dana Levenberg and Senator Pete Harcum for their strong leadership in bringing this bill to fruition. Our state and federal statutes provide the clear authority and responsibility of our state agencies to conduct and implement a science-driven solution process that includes transparent, independent, authoritative, and comprehensive analyses and best practices for waste management, safe and secure on-site storage, thorough wastewater testing, ecosystem testing, and continuous monitoring, site remediation, continuous air monitoring, as well as for other decommissioning operations and policy decisions with full public input. One example is the comprehensive wastewater testing prior to the waste management process and storage on site. As you know, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health released their reports on their testing, and their findings included 9 PFAS compounds, semi-volatile organic and volatile organic compounds, as well as metals, including zinc, which exceeded New York State limits, as well as cyanide. This underscores the importance for New York State to ensure that the EPA priority pollutants, including PFAS, are tested as part of the process. According to Ken Buesler, a marine radiochemist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, who reviewed the Pilgrim analyses, he reported that the numbers for cesium-137 in the untreated water are 200 million times higher than what's in the ocean right now, and further tests would be needed to determine levels of other radioisotopes such as carbon-14, strontium-90, plutonium, uranium, which require advanced testing.
15 seconds, Ellen.
Thank you. Again, this points out the importance of thorough testing. Mr. Buesler also pointed out concerns about treatment systems, if their removal of radionuclides and the repeated need to retreat. And this underscores the importance of New York State involving independent experts to determine the effectiveness of treatment systems, what radionuclides would be treated, what radionuclides would need to be retreated.
Ms. Weininger, are you wrapping up?
Yes, and full oversight of this treatment process. Thank you so much for the work of the DOB and for attention to these very critical issues. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. Manna, are you available now, or should we?
I am.
Okay.
And thank you. I want to, in particular, say that tonight, as much as any of the meetings I've attended, there was really good education of the DOB members and the public, and I appreciate that. It's when we first conceived of the need for a decommissioning oversight board, that was one of the main purposes, is to have key stakeholders in the community understand the decommissioning process. I think it's also identified some important gaps that need to be addressed, some with regard to safety. But if I understood correctly, it does sound like Holtec will honor the legislation that Senator Harcum and Assemblywoman Levenberg proposed, and the governor just recently signed. And I think there are good on-site alternatives to be explored. And if there's any help we can provide, including connecting the DOB with experts, we will. And the last thing I want to say, just to keep my comment short, is that it is critically important that New York State take leadership in the protection of human health and the environment, so that in particular would fall to DEC and Department of Health. But there are other agencies that have jurisdiction, and I think that we have very good evidence that they have more jurisdiction than they have been exercising. The NRC does have some major responsibility, but that it doesn't end there, and there are also very serious gaps. One example is that the post-shutdown activities report doesn't have to be approved by the NRC, it only has to be submitted, and there's no real serious opportunity for public input. So
15 seconds, Manna.
a lot of what we're seeing now is a result of the lack of oversight, proactive oversight by the NRC, and the state needs to fill that gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Joshua Raderman. And if I can just ask, while we're getting Josh pulled up, Margaret Rubik, if you're joining by phone, if you could dial *9 to let us know you're joining us this evening. Margaret Rubik, *9 if you're joining us. And with that...
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, my name is Joshua Raderman. I was born in Rockland County back, I'm not going to say when, but my father used to do this in the 70s. My father used to tell me stories about the 1940s when he used to go swimming in the Hudson River, and what an incredibly beautiful place it used to be, and how it would attract all sorts of different types of folks. I currently now live in Colorado. Please don't hold it against me. But since that time, I've worked very, very much in the science side of the hemp industry. I really would like to bring to light that here in Colorado, which has an enormous amount of heavy metal waste, radioactive waste, and waste from the mining industry, we've seen dramatic results from the bioremediation of these compounds through the growing of hemp. And I would ask each of you to please investigate some of the studies that have been done on this, whereas we've seen some incredible results without the use of dumping anything. We've been storing the hemp in hempcrete, we've been processing the hemp, we've been processing radiation through bacterial function in the fermentation process. And here we've really had real-world experience with alternative methods for dealing with Superfund sites, as well as intensely polluted soils, and we've seen remarkable results. So this is very close to my heart. I'd love to come back to New York and see the river clean. I really appreciate what you're all doing to take concern for the citizens of your state. I really do believe that government is supposed to step in where people can, and that hopefully a government is in the best interest of the people, not just in the best interest of the politicians' jobs. and public and private interests. So I really commend all of you for taking care of the people. And all I ask you to do is please investigate some of the remediary options that involve that.
Thank you. Margaret Rubik, just one more opportunity here. Please dial *9 if you're joining by phone, or if you're online, please raise your hand. You may be joining under another name. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to Jocelyn DiCrescenzo. And while we're pulling Ms. DiCrescenzo up, Tony Constantino, if you're joining by phone, please dial *9 to let us know you're joining us. Ms. DiCrescenzo, are you with us? You're unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. I have a couple of things I'd like to address. And first of all, I wanted to thank Governor Hochul for signing the Save the Hudson River bill. It was an astonishing event, and I'm so glad that I was able to be part of that. I want to thank everyone on the DOB. I'd like to thank Assemblywoman Dana Levenberg and Senator Parkham for their hard work, and everyone who was part of the effort to make things come to the point where they are. My name is Jocelyn DiCrescenzo, and I live in Valley Cottage, Rockland County, New York. I thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to say that regarding tritium, we cannot accept it in our air or water. It needs to be kept safe on site, away from the environment for at least 60 years. Think about that. Workers will have more work, which leads to another big concern I have. The public feels very strongly that workers with experience, skills, and legacy knowledge of Indian Point, and who are union labor workers, should not be used as pawns by Holtec, which is their MO. They've threatened this twice now, at least. Holtec's previous behavior with labor that they will try to replace union workers with non-union workers trying to cut corners. That they will try to do this as a strong arm tactic, unnecessarily laying off workers. The public supports the workers, and we hope that if Holtec tries to do this, the state will push back. Additionally, I'd like to bring up the subject of inspections. I'd like to speak regarding that at Indian Point. To ensure that Holtec does not heat the wastewater so that it evaporates into the air. The DEC should have continuous monitoring and inspections at Indian Point to ensure that Holtec is not engaged in forced evaporation of wastewater in light of the whistleblower's highly technical report letter stating that Holtec is employing a forced evaporation process during its decommissioning of the Pilgrim nuclear reactor in Massachusetts. I know you addressed that a little bit. Similar to some occupational safety and health administration inspections, some of these inspections should not only be scheduled in advance, but should be surprise inspections. They should be a surprise. There also needs to be proactive public posting of reports in a timely manner on the Decommissioning Oversight Board docket, so that we actually have access to the information, so that we can do our own timely reporting and questions and concerns that we would like to address.
30 seconds, Ms. DiCrescenzo.
Oh, that's all. I just wanted to thank you very much, and those are just a few of my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony Constantino, please raise your hand on the Zoom chat if you're joining us. *9 if you're joining by phone. Seeing none, we'll move to the speakers attending in Cortland. I'll name the first three here, and you may begin walking up to the mic. Nancy Van will be our first speaker in Cortland, followed by Tina Volsbongar and Santosh Nandabalan.
Hi, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. You may have noticed when I walked in that I had a nosebleed, and I I'd hoped to not have that by the time I got here, but it continued. Unfortunately, that's not my most concerning health problem related to Indian Point. As a cancer survivor, I am very concerned about not only the past releases of radiation from the Indian Point plant, but also the threat to continue those releases. Despite the fact that we have wonderful law passed by Dana Levenberg and Peter Harcum and the whole legislature of New York, and signed thankfully by Governor Hochul. We have heard that Holtec has threatened to take that to court or to ignore the law and continue to dump radioactive water. This cannot happen. You might also have noticed my No Holtec t-shirt. That is not something that has been done by the groups here. This is from a group in New Mexico where some of my Native American friends live. They don't want this waste taken out there and dumped on their lands either. They are only one of the many groups and governments that are concerned about the actions of Holtec for very good reason. Holtec in the past has a very bad record of ignoring laws, starting with things like bribing a TVA supervisor, after that lying on government forms to get New Jersey tax credits, promising non-existent jobs to the state of Ohio to get tax credits, and most recently, a whistleblower has brought to our attention that they wanted him to lie on a prospectus in order to get a grant of investment from the Hyundai Corporation. This has come out this year, and this ongoing contempt for the law is particularly concerning to me as a former retired Wall Street lawyer, to lie on a prospectus in order to get an investment.
Ms. Van,
That's
are you
something that
wrapping up?
has been in the news with other folks, and lying on government forms is particularly on all of our minds these days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Tina Volz-Bongar.
Hi, I'm Tina Volz-Bongar, and I live in Peekskill, New York, and I'm part of United for Clean Energy and also the Stop Holtec Coalition, and that involved stopping the dumping. I really want to thank Governor Hochul. Governor Hochul did the right thing by the citizens, and this is what we did. We really, we lobbied her, we educated her, we got out the masses, and we did the right thing. All of us want to see this waste stored on site and not in our air or our water. I want to thank Senator Harcum and you, Assemblymember Levenberg, and I guess Sandy Galiff isn't here. Can thank her for doing the right thing and putting this legislation forward. I want to thank you, John Sipos, for writing a letter to the NRC and calling them out on the rulemaking process. I'm very glad you did that and informed the public about that, and now I can advocate to my elected federal officials, which I plan to do. Tom Condon, thank you for writing a letter about the NRC inspectors, and I don't believe that Holtec should be allowed to do any work until we look at the NRC inspectors and the kind of inspection reports that they've done. Call me crazy. It's 2,000 tons of irradiated fuel that we have on site there. Anyway. So with that, and it's been a year since I did my emergency planning presentation, and this is what I am going to send to the NRC. I'm going to tell them that I am not part of their sacrifice zone. So I plan to get active to try to get an expert, get the county involved, and in disaster preparedness management, because we are next to pipelines, we have climate change, we have Hudson River rise, and anyway. So, Mr. Baroni, I've been talking to some experts. I've reached out to some experts, and I'm wondering if you would be open to watching an interview that I did recently with an expert about temporary on-site storage.
Sure.
Oh, great, thank you. All right, that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next, we have Santosh Nandabalan, followed by Jacqueline Drexler and Courtney Williams.
Thanks. Yeah, I can keep this short. My name is Santosh Nandabalan. I'm a community organizer with Food and Water Watch and Food and Water Action. We represent over 200,000 members and supporters throughout New York State, and really want to convey this. I know it's been said a lot, but a huge thank you to Governor Hochul for signing the Save the Hudson bill. This is incredibly meaningful legislation, not just for New York State, but we need to set a precedent that our waterways are no longer dumping grounds, not just for radioactive waste, but for industry, to take not only citizens for granted, but a beloved environment and something that hosts a giant economy for the region. So that is a huge boon. Thank you, Assemblymember Levenberg. Thank you, Senator Harcum. For us, moving forward is, what do we do with this waste? This is a real issue for this energy source in general, but now that it's here, we want to make sure that this waste doesn't end up in our air and our water. And I think for a lot of the people in New York State, a lot of the public, there's a real mistrust in some of the regulatory oversight. There's definite mistrust in Holtec. There's definite mistrust in some of the process, but we see that work is being done to rebuild that trust, and work is being done to ensure that public voices are brought in. We want to, one, make sure that the process on this is done right so that the wastewater is tested properly, that there's ample opportunities to get public comment and insight from people that are either experts or we all drink the water, breathe the air, for everyone in the community. And two, a big thing here we see, at least in the temporary point here, is that this waste can be stored safely on site. And we're happy to work not only with the Hochul administration, but with state agencies here to work through what that looks like and to make sure we can ourselves check on what we think is the right thing to do. So moving forward, we really want to see on-site storage of this waste while it degrades, have it not end up in our air and water. And we want to set a precedent here that you can't just dump it somewhere else. So moving this waste to another location is simply off the table. We think that it's here, we have to deal with it now. Moving forward, there's a conversation for our regulatory agencies and how industries operate. We are grateful to see more progressive leadership take on protecting our waterways and protecting our economy. So thank you to the folks that have been pushing to make sure we're here today. We're going to take that forward and ensure that the Hochul administration continues its good work. And we hope to interface with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Drexler?
Yes. Hello, I'm Jackie Drexler from Valley Cottage, New York. And I do thank the DOB. This has been a very good meeting, and Holtec for participating. So I did come here with notes to take, a whole page of notes, which have gone missing. And I'm a classical flutist, and I can memorize concertos, but I just can't memorize my notes like that. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about this testing of the waters. So I know that the Department of Health is quite comfortable and used to doing testing of waters, but I do believe that there needs to be much more comprehensive testing of these waters. I also feel that there needs to be characterization of what's in that water. Now, at the last DOB meeting, there was a gentleman from the NRC here who said, oh, I have that in my suit, in my briefcase, but he wouldn't show it. So obviously, Holtec has done their testing. Is that correct, Mr. Baroni?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. But is not willing to release the results of that until there has been the treatment, and then they'll release it. But we need to know that now. I don't understand why there can't be transparency. This is information we all need to know. We need to know what's in that water. We need to know what the levels are. We need to know how many times it needs to be treated and what different kinds of treatment have to happen. And so that's something that's very, very important to me. And I also do believe that there's really going to be the way to move forward to have storage on site that's safe, that's away from the environment, that's away from people. And quite honestly, you know, so tritium has this thing called the half-life, which everyone knows. And really, we need it to be here for about 60 years and let it really decay before it is released. And I do believe that there's no reason for it to not be here. We're going to be having the casks here. I don't see why we can't keep the water here and let it actually decay until it's at a safe enough level that it won't be harming the environment. So I do want to thank everyone, especially Senator Harcum, Assemblywoman Dana Levenberg, and all of the DOB. I mean, you've really been, at times, willing to share information with us. But you know what? We need transparency. There's no such thing as proprietary information here.
15 seconds, ma'am.
So I'm just hoping that we're going to store it safe on site for as long as we possibly can. Not for one cycle, but for more than one cycle. And that everyone will work together and play in the sandbox nicely. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams, and up next will be Susan Shapiro and Michael Marks.
Thanks. Courtney Williams from Peekskill, and I want to reiterate the thanks that was expressed by so many other speakers for Governor Hochul signing the bill and our electeds for getting it through and for other work by members of the DOB. And I have a bunch of questions. I can just say them, and then if there's responses, hopefully that won't eat into my time. I'm wondering if Enbridge has notified the DOB about Project Maple. Will that include pipeline work at Indian Point? Has anybody heard of it? They're planning to expand the Algonquin pipeline again. On the 25th of August, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit invalidated the NRC license granted to interim storage partners for an interim storage facility, finding that the NRC didn't have authority under federal law to issue licenses for interim storage. So I'm wondering what impact that has on Holtec's plans, since they keep telling us they'll be sending the waste somewhere, but it's not legal, and the NRC, they touted the license they got. You can't, it's been invalidated, so I don't know if we need to file a lawsuit against Holtec or if that precedent will hold for Holtec as well. Tina held up this mailer, but I don't think she described what it is. This is something I got in the mail earlier this week, implying that it is a sure thing that the NRC will grant Holtec the permission to stop maintaining the 10-mile perimeter because per this piece of PR, since the fuel has been removed from the reactor and is being placed in long-term storage in the casks, there is no longer a risk of a significant radiological emergency at the site affecting Westchester, Rockland, Orange, and Putnam counties. Again, you know, so many people know what a QR code is, and everybody around here speaks English, but I guess in this case, it's probably just as well that they don't read this. But we heard again, you know, parents in this community have been told over and over again how great those Reuters-Stokes monitors are and how, you know, we're so safe and we'll know if there's a problem, but now we hear they're gonna be no longer maintained, taken down. We don't have $1 million around here to send out these fancy mailers. But let me remind everyone that the soil at Indian Point is contaminated because everything's been leaking for decades. And as we know from wildfires in California, when you set radioactive stuff on fire, like contaminated soil and stuff like that, that spreads the radioactivity. So I don't know how Holtec decides what is considered a significant radiological emergency, but considering that I'm like a mile from the plant, I might have a slightly different criteria for that.
Ms. Williams, are you wrapping up?
Yep, last question. The July 2023 questions that were asked, that the answers were uploaded recently. They were mostly non-answers, including instructions to call Pilgrim ourselves and Google stuff for answers. And I should hope, given that on their own flyer they talk about our fleet, that asking our Holtec questions about Holtec at Pilgrim would get us an actual answer and not a kiss-off to go call Pilgrim ourselves. So I hope those questions will be actually answered and the responses will be amended so that, we're not all calling Pilgrim Holtec.
Ms. Shapiro? Followed by Michael Marks.
Thank you for this meeting tonight. I thought it was very informative, and I want to thank all of our elected officials, including the governor, for doing everything to stop the dumping into the river and protecting our river and the region. So thank you for that. And I really want to thank you and support Mr. Condon and Mr. Sipos trying to get the NRC to do the right thing, to actually create some sort of decommissioning procedures, because they have backtracked on that. They used to have them, they abandoned them, and now there's this process in place, so I really support your efforts to make that happen. I doubt it will. So in the meantime, I really feel there's a serious gap, and that's why New York State and the DOB has to stand up and be the ones who really require procedures to be followed and really ensure that there's protection. I was a little shocked after we saw that slide about the 15 monitors, then to hear that, oh, yeah, but we're only going to have 4 left. We're going to shut them down. Who gets to make that decision? Is it Holtec gets to make that decision, or New York State should be making that decision to protecting all of us? And are those monitors only for air, or are they also for water? And I really was a little appalled to hear that. So I do think that's one level of where the state has to step in and really fill this gap that the NRC is not going to take. I also agree with Mr. Lochbaum's issues about the minimal inspection, the 1 or 2 casts every 5 years, and then we hear, oh, but that doesn't start for 20 years. So what happens from now till 20 years when we may have some problems with these casts and nobody's monitoring them? I think, once again, New York State has to say, no, that's not adequate. We need more inspections. We need proper inspections. We need transparency of inspections. And what happens, we heard that the casts, if they drop at a certain height, can be damaged. What about if there's an earthquake? We know Indian Point's at the cross-section of 2 earthquakes. Earthquakes are happening more often these days. There's a lot of world-changing issues, and nobody's really addressed that. Then we talked tonight, Holtec told us tonight that they're going to be using chemicals to clean various pipes and tubes. What happens to those chemicals that are now radioactive? What kind of chemicals are being used? Where are they getting stored or dumped? We need to follow along all these different parts of this process. It's a very complicated process. And then once again, as other people have said, we need to know what's in the effluent that is going to be then supposedly cleaned or filtered before you do that. So we know what we're talking about, what chemicals are in there, what level of chemicals are in there. This is the bottom of the spent fuel pool. This is the dredges of spent fuel pool 2 that we know has had problems for years and years and years. So once again, I ask that New York State, the DOH, the DEC, the Public Service Commission, please stand up, and the AG's office. We have the right as a state to be the ones who have oversight over this process, because the federal government will not do it. They've passed it on to the state. It's now in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Michael Marks with us tonight? Mr. Marks? Following Mr. Marks is Bruce Given and Nathan Plummer. Is Mr. Given with us this evening?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Mr. Given, if you'd like to come up to the mic.
Thank you. I've lived in New York State all of my life. I've been working with nuclear from 18 years old on. I'm very worried you're going to Chicken Little yourselves into a radiological disaster. You're worrying about a lot of minutia. You got to get the cans into Yucca Mountain, and we're all safe for 10,000 years. Along the way, you're worried about the water. Japan's dumping all the stuff from Fukushima Daiichi into the Pacific. Nothing's happened. You worry about Chernobyl. Well, Chernobyl was a comedy of errors. Fukushima Daiichi was a comedy of errors. We've learned a lot as human beings. We make mistakes. We learn from them. You're crying over pico-curies and scratches and cracks in concrete. And as the gentleman said, it's a multi-purpose container. If the outside cracks, you pick it up, put it in another container. If it's in Yucca Mountain, nobody's going to be looking at it. Nobody's going to be opening that can to look to see what's in it because it's going to be buried for 10,000 years and you're going to be it's your suicide if you want to go in there. You're worrying about the wrong things. You're trying to decommission the plant, not realizing, as human beings, we've learned how to handle this stuff. It's not the crisis you're making it out to be. So, if you guys want to dead walk into it, that's fine by me. I'll be dead. I'm not going to live that long. I don't care. But those cans have to be moved to Yucca Mountain, or our great-grandchildren are going to be in danger. There has to be a final solution provided by the federal government to fix that Yucca Mountain and open it up for the thousands and thousands and thousands of spent fuel cans and low-level radioactive waste that we need to park somewhere until finally Mother Nature takes care of it. You're worrying about tritium. Half-life is 12 years. There's so little tritium left. Why are you worrying about it? You're worrying 60 years, 120 years. It's practically gone. It's naturally occurring in the oceans, comes down from sunshine. You're worrying about radiation from here. I swear, you should all go nude sunbathing in Florida to soak up some hardcore radiation from a thermonuclear furnace we call the sun. Smoking a cigarette. We burn coal for energy and nobody worries about the radioactive ash falling out of the coal.
15
They're even
seconds,
talking
sir.
about mining uranium out of the coal. I think we're looking at this through a microscope when we need to step back and say, look, we need to get the cans out of here, get them to Yucca Mountain, get them out of the Hudson Valley. They have a design life of 110 years. Are you going to wait 110 years to find out that the engineers were right? Or are you going to get them out of the Hudson Valley as quickly as possible so it's not a problem anymore?
Mr. Given, are you wrapping up?
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Before Mr. Plummer begins, Warren Smith and then Joseph Fordyce will be following. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nathan Plummer, and I'm a resident of White Plains, New York. I actually worked with Con Ed for over 30 years and spent a little bit of my time at Indian Point and worked primarily at 511 and all over. Had me down at 14th Street as well. Long and short of why I'm here and my team is here, Mr. Josh Ruderman is on our team as well. We're here to actually introduce phytoremediation as an alternative process to the wastewater dumping. We're not in total opposition to Holtec, but we do believe that we have an alternative means of remediating the tritium, and we'd like for you to take a real serious look at what we're presenting. And it is, as Josh had said, something that they're doing in other parts of the country. It has been done even at Chernobyl and in Italy, where they had an explosive accidental accident at a machine shop. It's a ammunitions machine shop, and they used it, and the residents at Italy are back in their residence, and at Chernobyl they are still using it, the hemp, which is cannabis sativa, to remediate the soil. This is one of my associates, Mr. Mike Reese, who will take up the rest of my time, and I'll just give this to...
Thank you, Nathan. Michael Reese. I'm the retired president of Pollution Control Industries in East Chicago, Indiana. I've done thousands of chemical hazardous waste disposal facilities. Nate asked me to look into dealing with the tritium water. I think there's 1,340,000 gallons of it. And Nate's approach to this with his hemp product it appears to be something we should look at, and that's why we're here. Thank you.
Can you just state your name again, sir?
Michael Reese.
Thank you.
Well, I was retired president of Pollution Control Industries in East Chicago, Indiana.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Smith?
Is our time up? Or we got a little bit?
You have about 15 seconds if you want to take it.
All right. In regard to the total process of the phytoremediation, it actually takes the hemp, remediates the contaminants. Then there is a form application called pyrolysis. They're using it in California. They're burning, well, it's not really a burning process, it's actually a containment of biomass, and the biomass itself is heated up to 1800 degrees in a vacuum sealed environment. So no contaminants come out. And they're using this right now to produce electricity for the California utility company. And the gentleman who actually has spearheaded it is Mr. Bill Riley. And if we get some time, maybe at another meeting, he will come in and speak. But his website information is in the packet. I have two other packets.
You, sir.
I think I did send some to some of the other participants here, but I have two other packets that I can hand out this evening. But I thank you for the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Warren Smith?
Hi, I'm Warren Smith. I'm a lifelong resident of Cortland. I've actually lived in the hamlet of Verplank for my entire life, and which I think makes me, I think I live about the closest to the plant of anyone in this room, I'm pretty sure. We hang a clothesline on the second dome there, reactor 2, basically. But what I've been listening to tonight, and over the past, I think I've been to maybe 3 or 4 board meetings, is a great, conversation. And in that conversation, we've got politicians, we've got professionals, professional staff, and we have, it seems like, our resident nuclear expert, Dave Lochbaum. And from what I understand, there was 4 different ways of getting rid of this tritiated water, and so we can proceed with decommissioning the plant. We could do what they've been doing for 60 years, which was release it into the Hudson River. We could evaporate it, which I was told, I think, Dave, I don't know if you're still on, but if I remember right, it was 700 times more dangerous than releasing it into the Hudson River. We could store it into tanks, which I think one of the conversations I heard, it was like a 64% of a failure rate over 12 years of the tanks. And then the last but not least was to ship it off to some other place, and that was out of the question because of environmental injustice. what I noticed tonight was that the Riverkeepers representative, Ms. Lang, and Assemblywoman Levenberg were hanging on every word that Dave, in his presentation and asking him questions. And you guys seem to respect his perspective and his experience. And from what I understand, his recommendation was to release into the Hudson River was the safest. That was following what I would call the science, which is something that I've heard a lot lately on TV, and I've been trying to do myself. I'm a graphic designer. I'm not a scientist in any way, shape, or form, so I would rely on these experts. So what I was wondering is, when legislation was being drafted to stop that recommendation, what you relied on for your reference material in order to decide that was something that needed to be done, if we're following the science. That's really, in the end, I'm 60 years old. I've just got a newborn granddaughter just over a week ago, and from what I'm hearing in this room, she's going to be the one cleaning up this site 60 years from now, and that
15
really
seconds.
does not sound like something that I want to see happen. One quick thing was the tanks. From what I understand, in storing in the tanks, they're not sealed, so my granddaughter, my children would be breathing the evaporated water that's coming out of those tanks. So it's really I really hope you guys are going to follow the science. Whatever the next step is, I don't know what it is, but I hope that it's well researched and that we're all going to be safe. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Joseph Fordyce, are you with us this evening?
How you doing? How you doing? My name is Joseph Fordyce, and I'm here from Mount Vernon, New York. I'm a member of this county, been so my whole life, and I'm here in support of the team with Nathan Plummer bringing forth the photo remediation. I've had a hemp company in this county for several years, and just to see that the possibility of being able to use such an alternative, I think would be very, very exciting and environmentally friendly in a lot of different ways. And I think whatever is needed to investigate this should be done on the whole tech's behalf, because if possible, we should be looking at how we're looking at sustainable alternatives, environmentally friendly alternatives, especially doing something like decommissioning something so vital to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes the public statement portion of tonight's meeting. As was mentioned earlier, there are a number of avenues to submit comments, certainly at our meetings during the public statement portions, but also those available on your screen. The links here are all also viewable on our website, dps.ny.gov/Indian Point. So with that, I turn it back to you, Tom.
Thank you. Very good meeting. Thank you all very much. Any last words by our members of the DOB? Mayor Knickerbocker?
Yes, I'd like to say something. First of all, I'd like to know if Dave Lochbaum is still on the line.
Dave, do we still have you?
Yeah, Dave Lochbaum, I'm still here.
Great.
I have a few questions, Dave. I have attended, since the announcement of the closure in 2017, I've attended every possible meeting in reference to what was going to be happening to our community. And I just want you to clarify, since you're an independent expert, the half-life of tritium, I believe you said was 12 years?
12.3 years, yes.
Okay, because there's been different numbers that have been thrown out here tonight, so I just want to take it from you that it's 12.3 years. Also, I know you had done a very wonderful presentation at one point on the storage containers that are being recommended by people to store the effluent. And when you had that conversation or that presentation, you did mention, or if you want to speak now on what your thoughts were about those storage containers. I know you explained how this, what the storage container vented, you know, how it vented. So would you like to go over that in your own words? Or otherwise, I'll just do a synopsis of it.
Yeah, this is Dave Bob. When I looked at on-site storage of contaminated water, I found that it's, a recurring problem is that the tanks leak. Either they're overfilled because of faulty level instrumentation. Vermont Yankee, for example, fairly recently dumped 140,000 gallons of water into the Connecticut River, contaminated water. Fukushima stored had a lot of water. Before they treated and released it to the Pacific, it leaked out and found its way into the Pacific. Indian Point, on several occasions in the past, has had storage tanks leak. February of 2009, I believe it was, they had a 10,000 gallon a day leak that they didn't discover for a while. And the result of that is the tritium or the contamination gets into places it shouldn't be in more concentrated or higher levels of contamination than if you did what was done for the last 60 years, treat and release it. So therefore, the potential harm to people who come into contact with that spilled or leaked fluid is a greater hazard than doing what was done for the last 60 years. That's why I recommended treat and release instead of taking the gamble.
Okay, and then you also said that it is vented through the top, that the container does need to be vented.
Yeah, there are different ways of venting it. Some of them are passive, so only if there's a differential pressure, does the vent valve open to allow air in or allow air out to prevent the tank from imploding or exploding. But it is, over the life of the thing, it will leak. Another system was to put a bladder inside the tank to contain the fluid, but bladders fail in about 7 years, so that just delays the leakage into the ground. It doesn't prevent it.
Thank you. So, listening actively during your presentation and the conversations that have gone on, I and my board felt to protect the residents of the village, and let me first back up and say this. We very clearly understand that what happens on that property not only affects the village of Buchanan, but the community as a whole. Okay, so we understand that. But being the mayor of the village, it is very important I also protect our residents. Listening to that, it is very clear that the storage of water on site in those containers is not acceptable or is a viable alternative. So not only the village of Buchanan, it will affect the other surrounding communities, our neighbors in Verplank, our neighbors in Montrose, our neighbors in Peekskill. It's not a viable alternative. So that is not going to be an alternative. I appreciate everyone's opinion here of what to do on the site. I appreciate that. I've listened with an open mind. But you also have to understand we are residents of the village of Buchanan. We have absolutely a right to our own decisions and our own opinions. I've respected yours. I've listened to yours. But with the understanding of what's happening with this, I went back to my board, and we did do a resolution that there will not be, or there'll be no permits given for storage above or below ground on the 240 acres or any parcel in the village of Buchanan. So what we have to do is find some way to get rid of this water. And you might not agree with me, you might be angry at me, but my job is to protect the residents in the village. And that is not a viable alternative. So I speak to some of the speakers tonight, the gentleman that said, you know, we'll go to the spent fuel. Yes, the federal government, the DOE, has promised to find a permanent repository. That's on them. So, you know, we have all these activists here, time to get after the feds, because yes, that should be taken off of the property also. Going back to the water, you know, I'm hearing another alternative here. Maybe it's a possibility. I don't know, I'm not a scientist. Alls I know from the information I heard, that is not what we need to do, is put those containers on that property. It vents. And Dave, I believe you said that when it vents, whatever's in there could potentially be on the ground as it vents. So it just makes common sense. That's not a viable alternative. So we're going to disagree on things, but this is one thing the Village of Buchanan feels very strongly about. The Village of Buchanan hasn't been considered here. Unfortunately, we're hearing, do this on the property, do that on the property. Well, what do the residents of the village think? What do they want? You know, so let's work together. Let's not, you know, say this is what this is what we're doing. That's not acceptable to the village. So I'm very sorry. But
that it's venting, the dry casts are venting already on the site?
that's been, yeah.
So
But we're talking about the water. We're talking about, so I'm in agreement with you. If we can find a permanent repository, I'm good.
To that is heat alone. There is nothing else that vents out of
You have to
those.
understand the science behind and the construction of the cask.
From radiation is...
It's heat removal from the cask itself. Hey, I know this will be my last time.
Okay, go ahead.
Can I just say a couple things?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much. So, from a transparency perspective, right? Kelly Tritoro, her department, and Holtec, we worked exclusively on an MOU, right, before we would release anything to the river. And that MOU required split samples to look at every radionuclide, right, including stuff that we would do from a Speedies permit, which were boron and lithium and some other things. We're fully transparent. I had no issue with that. Then there was an issue about, well, what are you going to do with strontium if it takes longer? I would have waited. There was a 12-day wait period before we would release the tanks anyway. It's all in the MOU. So I would ask, and I don't know why you're laughing, but I would ask that you go to the website, read the MOU, read the stuff that we're trying to do, right? And then if you have a comment on that, please come and see me. We were fully transparent on what we wanted to release to the river. And it was a split sample. I had nothing to do with anything that the state saw from a sample. Kelly, you could back me up. You don't?
Well, the state signed an MOU with Holtec, yes. DEC and DOH to undertake split sampling.
Right, so I have no problem looking at what we were to release. And if you want to look at what we want to, or what's in the pool now, we could do that also. Okay, so that's an issue, right? So just ask us instead of making accusations.
Excuse me,
The second thing,
excuse
sit down for a
me,
minute.
I would like to have
Rich.
some order here. I'd like to have some order so that the court reporter can take down what Mr. Baroni and Ms. Turturro are saying. People were able to speak tonight and speak their piece, and they were not interrupted. And I would ask, following Senator Harkin's suggestion, that we all be polite and considerate with the people. Mr. Baroni is trying to express an idea. Ms. Turturro was making a point. Let's let our fellow New Yorkers speak and have their say, just like others were allowed tonight. Thank you.
And unfortunately, I raised my voice, so I'll apologize for that, all right? So, but my point here is this, is we had no problem doing a split sample with the state and verifying what we would have discharged to the river was well within any limits. We had no problem with that. Second thing, the Reuters-Stokes monitors are gamma monitors, right? With the fuel in the casks, right, there's just not enough energy that we need the Reuters-Stokes a mile out of the property. What I did, I volunteered to help the community program is to leave the 4 in service on Broadway in case anybody was worried about what would happen to the BV school. I didn't have to do that. I thought it was a nice gesture, and it gets turned around like it's a negative. I just don't understand that. Why do I need them? There's not enough energy for them to see. That's the point you need to understand. There's never been a breach to any of the casts that Holtec has developed.
Rich.
And to that point,
yeah.
they are regularly surveyed by the RP department monthly. So if you would notice a difference in any radiation level, it would be known at the cask first.
I'm going to just seek to wrap this up, but I encourage anyone, if you want to stick around in the room and engage and talk some more, then you're welcome to do so. Nancy, we've had the public statement
I
hearing.
just wanted to have a question for Mr. Lockbaum, since this is new information that we've just gotten that we weren't able to comment on in the public comment period.
Nancy,
that
Nancy.
that
Nancy,
these casks would leak.
Excuse me, Tom is trying to respond to what is occurring here. So I would ask if you would let Mr. Congdon, who's the chair, to control this meeting. We've had a public statement.
Yes, I'm just asking him if I could make.
Now, please, excuse me, my
could
colleague
ask-
Tom Congdon wishes to speak.
It's okay.
Yeah.
It's all right. It's all right, Nancy. Look, we've provided how we can take additional comments and questions. We will answer the question. I can follow up with you after the meeting. I'm trying to wrap up the meeting. You have a question for Dave. We'll answer it. I'll follow up with you immediately after the meeting, and we'll get you the answer.
Well, we are still early with wrapping up the meeting. Could I
Nancy.
just have one question to Dave? I'm just asking.
Dave, would you entertain a quick question? Okay, go ahead.
The question is, we've heard from Dave about how safe, and from Holtec about how safe the casks and canisters are, and now we're hearing how dangerous the pools are. My question is, how can you make 100% safe casks and canisters for this highly radioactive spent fuel, but not be able to make pools that don't leak the water that is also radioactive? That's my question to Dave. And to Holtec.
Go ahead, Dave.
I don't know. I think the problem is when if you've ever paid a nickel for an open review library book, you paid a nickel more than the NRC has ever fined anybody for spilling millions of gallons of contaminated water here, there, and everywhere. Because there's no sanction for doing wrong, there's no incentive for getting it right. If there was a sanction for leaking water, we would have tanks that didn't leak. But since there's not, there's not.
Okay,
Thank you
I
very
would like to
much.
just have a
Thank
closing observations, and then we're going to wrap up. And Rich, you're welcome to hang out and have a few
Can
more
I just say
conversations.
one last thing?
One last thing,
One
and
last
then I'm
thing.
going to wrap up.
Courtney, if somebody told you to call Pilgrim, I apologize for that.
It's in there.
All right, and so let me know what it is, and we'll get you the answer. That's all I have.
Thank you.
And Victoria, one last comment.
Sorry I missed the opportunity earlier. I just want to restate Riverkeeper's great thanks to Assemblywoman Levenberg, to Senator Harcum, to Governor Hochul, to all the community members that advocated for the Save the Hudson bill. And Riverkeeper still stands strongly behind on-site storage for the treated water. Thank you.
Thank you.
We
And
have
I
difference
think,
of opinions, that's all.
Mayor, your comments at the end and the follow-up, obviously, there's a lot more discussion to continue to be had with respect to the wastewater. We look forward to hearing the results of Holtec's analysis of options, and there will be more discussion at future DOB meetings of that subject. And we respect all of the opinions and voices on the matter. So I appreciate everyone's participation tonight. Our next meeting is on December 6th, and we thank everyone for their attendance and safe travels tonight. Thank you. December 6th.